My sister screamed, "Get out," at her birthday dinner, while our father calmly nodded toward the door, and our mother smiled like she had just won a prize. I did not shed a single tear or beg them to understand. I simply walked away. The very next morning, I signed the deed to a $25 million mountain mansion in Colorado, paid in full, and I left their world behind without a single goodbye. Before I tell you exactly how I turned their ultimate betrayal into my empire, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build your own table after your family refused you a seat at theirs. My name is Aisha and I am 32 years old. The humid Atlanta air was completely shut out by the heavy glass doors of the ultra-exclusive restaurant in Buckhead, where my family had gathered to celebrate my sister Chloe turning 30. Crystal chandeliers hung low over the private dining tables, casting a warm, expensive glow across the room. I sat at the very edge of the table, keeping my posture straight and my hands folded in my lap. For my entire life, I had been the designated scapegoat of the Sterling family, the dark-skinned, quiet daughter who preferred writing code to attending country club galas. Chloe was the golden child. She was lighter-skinned, bubbly, aggressively social, and currently finishing her medical residency. Everything she did was celebrated with fanfare and overflowing bank accounts. Everything I did was met with sighs of disappointment and thinly veiled contempt. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of her milestone birthday. I had spent months trying to find the perfect gift, hoping that just once I could bridge the massive gap between us. I had tracked down a pristine limited edition vintage designer bag, a piece of fashion history that collectors spent years searching for. I knew Chloe loved labels, and I thought presenting her with something so rare would finally earn me a genuine smile. I placed the beautifully wrapped box on the table in front of her as the waiter poured more champagne into her glass. Chloe tore into the wrapping paper with the eagerness of a child. Her perfectly manicured nails ripped the heavy silk ribbon apart. But the moment she pulled the bag from its protective dust cover, her bright smile collapsed into a tight, furious sneer. She held the bag up by its strap, dangling it as if it were contaminated. "What is this, Aisha?" she demanded, her voice rising loudly enough to make the diners at the next table turn and look. "You brought me a used bag to my 30th birthday dinner. Are you actually insane or just completely broke?" I kept my voice calm and low, hoping to de-escalate the situation. "Chloe, it is not used. It is a highly sought-after vintage piece from a specific archival collection. I had it authenticated and sourced directly from a dealer in Paris. I thought you would appreciate the craftsmanship and the history behind it." "I do not want your cheap, thrifted insult," Chloe shouted, slamming her hand down so hard the silverware rattled against the porcelain plates. "This is exactly what you always do. You always try to embarrass me in front of my elite friends. You just could not stand the fact that everyone is celebrating me tonight, so you brought some secondhand trash to ruin my aesthetic. You are a stain on the Sterling family legacy." I opened my mouth to explain again, but my mother Valerie snatched the bag from the table. She looked at it with blatant disgust before tossing it onto the empty chair beside her. "You have always been envious of your sister Aisha," my mother said, her tone dripping with the same quiet venom she had used against me since childhood. "You cannot bear to see her shine. Just like when you purposely wore that cheap off-the-rack suit to her medical school graduation. You always have to make everything about your own little inadequacies." The injustice of her words burned in my chest. She conveniently ignored the fact that I wore that cheap suit to her graduation because I had drained my savings and taken on a third freelance job just to pay for Chloe to submit her medical school applications. I had spent nights typing code until my fingers cramped, subsisting on cheap ramen noodles so my sister could have the prestigious career my parents demanded. And yet, in my mother's rewritten version of history, I was simply a bitter, jealous sibling. Before I could process the unfairness of my mother's statement, my brother-in-law Preston leaned back in his chair and laughed. Preston was a wealthy white man who worked in corporate finance, and he loved nothing more than reminding me of my perceived lower status. He swirled his expensive bourbon and looked at me with a mixture of pity and amusement. "Not everyone is cut out for success, Valerie," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet dining room. "Aisha is trying her best with her little computer side hustle. I mean, building websites or whatever she does barely covers her rent in that sketchy part of town. You cannot expect her to understand high-end luxury. Let us just cut the dead weight before she asks us to cover her meal. I am sure she is just waiting for the check to arrive so she can pretend she forgot her wallet again. I stared at Preston. My side hustle, as he called it, was a sophisticated cybersecurity firm specializing in healthcare data encryption. I had spent 7 grueling years building an algorithm that secured patient data against international breaches. But to them, I was just a glorified tech support worker who fixed their laptops for free and endured their constant mockery. Chloe pointed her finger directly at the restaurant exit. Her face was flushed with manufactured rage. "Get out," she screamed. "Get out right now. You are ruining my birthday. You are ruining my pictures. You are ruining my entire aesthetic." The silence that followed her outburst was suffocating. I turned my head and looked directly at my father, Desmond. He was the patriarch of the family, the man who demanded respect and loyalty above all else. Surely he would not let his oldest daughter be thrown out of a public restaurant like a stray dog. But Desmond did not offer a single word of defense. He did not ask Chloe to calm down or tell Preston to watch his mouth. He simply looked at me with cold, indifferent eyes and gave a small definitive nod toward the exit. He was agreeing with them. My mother took a slow sip of her champagne, smiling triumphantly over the rim of her crystal glass. She had won. She had successfully cemented my position as the family outcast once again. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I did not plead with them to remember the sacrifices I had made for this family. The final thread tying me to these people snapped right there in the middle of that restaurant. I calmly stood up from my chair and smoothed the front of my dress. I reached into my purse and pulled out a heavy matte black metal card. I dropped it onto the center of the table right on top of the leather bill folder that held the $4,000 receipt for their extravagant dinner. "Put the entire table on this," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "Consider it my final contribution to the Sterling family legacy. Enjoy your vintage wine, Preston." I turned and walked away. My heels clicked against the marble floor, marking the rhythm of my liberation. As I pushed open the heavy glass doors to step out into the humid Georgia night, I heard Preston scoff behind me. "Probably a maxed-out credit card," he muttered to the table. "She will be begging us for grocery money by next week." He had no idea that the black card sitting on that table had absolutely no limit, and he certainly had no idea that the woman he had just insulted was walking out of their lives with an empire they could not even begin to comprehend. The thick summer air of Atlanta hit my face as I stepped onto the sidewalk. The valets were rushing, retrieving luxury cars for the restaurant patrons, but I did not stop at the valet stand. My phone began to vibrate violently in my purse. I pulled it out and saw a barrage of messages lighting up the screen. It was Preston in the family group chat. "You left before paying the valet. You broke idiot," he texted. "Send me $500 right now. You ruined the whole night and embarrassed us in front of the restaurant staff. You owe Chloe a massive apology." Another message popped up, this time from my mother. "Do not bother coming to Sunday dinner, Aisha. Your father is extremely disappointed in your childish behavior. You need to grow up and learn your place." I stared at the glowing screen, reading the toxic words that had defined my existence for 3 decades. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I could have responded. I could have defended myself. I could have pointed out that I had just paid for their $4,000 meal, but doing so would only invite more arguments, more gaslighting, and more pain. Instead, I tapped the settings icon on my phone. I blocked Preston. I blocked Chloe. I blocked my mother. I blocked my father. One by one, I severed their digital access to me. The constant stream of negativity suddenly went completely dark. A sleek black armored SUV pulled up to the curb right in front of me. The rear door swung open and I climbed into the cool, air-conditioned interior of the spacious backseat. The tinted windows immediately shielded me from the glaring streetlights and the judgmental eyes of the world outside. I settled into the plush leather, taking a long, deep breath. On the console screen, mounted in front of me, the face of my trusted corporate attorney and mentor, Malcolm, appeared. Malcolm was a sharp, brilliant legal mind who had guided me through the treacherous waters of the tech industry. He looked at me with a wide, proud smile. "The ink is dry, Aisha," Malcolm said, his voice vibrating with barely contained excitement. "The acquisition just cleared the final regulatory hurdles. The funds have been fully transferred and verified." I closed my eyes as a wave of profound relief washed over my entire body. For 7 years, I had poured my blood, sweat, and tears into my company. While my family was busy mocking my IT hobby and demanding I fix their broken printers, I was sitting in a tiny, poorly lit apartment coding military-grade encryption protocols. I had pitched to venture capitalists, faced countless rejections, and worked 100-hour weeks to build a software architecture that hospitals desperately needed to protect patient privacy. Today, a massive global tech conglomerate had purchased my company for $180 million. The money was now sitting securely in my private accounts. I had generational wealth. I had ultimate freedom. And the people who had just thrown me out of a restaurant like trash had absolutely no clue. "We did it, Malcolm," I whispered, feeling the reality of the moment finally settling into my bones. "We actually did it." "You did it, Aisha," he corrected me gently. "I just handled the paperwork. You built an impenetrable fortress." "And speaking of fortresses, are we still proceeding with the relocation plan?" "Absolutely," I said, opening my eyes and looking at the screen. "I am done with Atlanta. I am done with the humidity, the memories, and the ghosts of the Sterling family. Have the funds been routed for the property we discussed?" "Everything is ready for your signature tomorrow morning," he confirmed. "The seller has agreed to all terms, and the closing agent is waiting for you in Denver. You are about to be the sole owner of a very beautiful piece of the Rocky Mountains." I leaned forward and tapped the intercom button, connecting me to the driver in the front seat. "Head to Hartsfield-Jackson Airport," I instructed, my voice steady and resolute. "We are going to the private aviation terminal." The driver nodded, and the heavy SUV merged smoothly into the Atlanta traffic, leaving the restaurant and my toxic family far behind. I looked out the tinted window, watching the familiar city streets blur past me. This was the city where I was born, the city where I was constantly told I was not pretty enough, not smart enough, not worthy enough to stand beside my golden sister. My phone sat silently in my lap, stripped of all the contacts that had anchored me to a life of misery. I was not just leaving a dinner party. I was leaving the state, the time zone, and my entire identity as their convenient scapegoat. They thought they had punished me by kicking me out. They thought they were teaching me a lesson about my place in the world. But they had actually given me the greatest gift possible. They had set me free without any lingering guilt or obligation. As the SUV pulled onto the highway heading toward the airport, I felt a small, authentic smile touch my lips for the first time that night. I was flying into a future that was entirely my own. The silence in the car was luxurious. There were no insults, no demands for money, no condescending remarks about my clothes or my career. There was only the quiet hum of the engine and the absolute certainty that I would never allow myself to be treated as an option again. I was about to build an empire on top of a mountain, and they would never be invited to sit at my table. The air in Denver was crisp, thin, and completely devoid of the suffocating humidity I left behind in Atlanta. I sat in a high-backed leather chair inside a penthouse executive suite overlooking the Rocky Mountains. The glass walls of the boardroom offered a panoramic view of snow-capped peaks, a stark contrast to the stifling private dining room I had walked out of less than 12 hours ago. The massive mahogany table in front of me was not set with crystal champagne flutes or plates of overpriced food meant to impress shallow socialites. It was covered in thick stacks of legal documents, representing a level of wealth my family had spent their entire lives pretending to possess. Malcolm sat across from me, tapping his gold pen against a dark leather folio. He slid the final wire transfer authorization form across the polished wood. I was not buying a luxury sports car to show off at a local country club. I was not buying a collection of designer handbags to desperately prove my worth to people who viewed me as garbage. I was reviewing the comprehensive portfolio for a $25 million architectural fortress nestled high in the snowy peaks of Aspen, Colorado. It was a masterpiece of steel glass and heated stone built specifically for absolute privacy and impenetrable security. The property featured a private helipad, biometric entry points, and a state-of-the-art server room isolated from the main grid. It was not just a home, it was an empire. I picked up the pen and signed my name. The ink flowed smoothly across the heavy paper. I did not need a mortgage. I did not need a team of financial backers to scrutinize my credit history. I authorized the wire transfer to be paid in full with cash. One signature and $25 million moved securely from my newly loaded corporate accounts directly to the seller. The closing agent, a sharply dressed woman who had treated me with nothing but the utmost respect since I walked through the heavy oak doors, stamped the final seal of approval on the deed. She extended her hand, congratulating me on the purchase with genuine professional admiration. There was no condescension in her eyes, no underlying sneer questioning my place at the table. For the first time in my life, I was simply a highly successful woman, conducting business on my own terms. Malcolm gathered the heavy stacks of paperwork into his briefcase and looked at me with a satisfied nod. He organized the files meticulously before pausing and looking up. He asked if I wanted to send a formal forwarding address to my father's corporate headquarters at Sterling Logistics. He knew that for years any official mail or tax documents related to my independent contracting work had been routed through Desmond's corporate office, a lingering tether to the family business. I leaned back in my leather chair and let out a genuine sharp laugh. The sound echoed in the quiet executive suite. My father thinks I am his free bookkeeper, I told Malcolm. For years, Desmond belittled my career, treating my cybersecurity expertise like a blue-collar hobby, while demanding I spend my weekends patching up his company's outdated logistics software. I audited his taxes for free because his expensive accountants were too incompetent to catch the massive discrepancies in his freight routing margins. I secured his failing corporate servers because he stubbornly refused to pay for proper IT infrastructure, claiming technology was just a money pit. I thought about all the holidays I spent huddled in the dark corner of my childhood home, running diagnostic tests on Desmond's corporate network, while he poured expensive bourbon for his friends in the living room. He bragged endlessly about Chloe saving lives in her medical residency and praised Preston for his aggressive financial maneuvers. Desmond never once mentioned the millions of dollars I saved his business by closing severe security loopholes or restructuring his digital payroll. He just expected my highly specialized labor as a mandatory tax for breathing the same air as his golden child. He took my brilliance and labeled it basic tech support. Let him figure out how to balance his own ledgers now, I said, my voice hardening with cold resolution. Let him see exactly how long his logistics empire survives without the dead weight he so happily agreed to throw out. Let Preston try to manage the automated routing algorithms that I custom-built to keep their supply chain from collapsing under its own weight. Malcolm smirked and closed his briefcase, securing the brass locks with a definitive click. As a lawyer who had seen the inner workings of my father's disorganized corporate structure, Malcolm knew exactly how precarious Sterling Logistics was, without my invisible safety net holding their digital infrastructure together. They were flying blind into a hurricane, and they had just thrown their only navigator out of the plane. Just as I stood up to admire the mountain view, my burner phone vibrated aggressively on the conference table. It was the cheap prepaid device I had purchased at the airport terminal, solely to monitor any critical loose ends I had left behind in Georgia. I picked it up and tapped the cracked screen. It was an email forwarded directly from my mother, Valerie. The subject line was typed in all capital letters, demanding immediate attention. I opened the attachment. It was a formal, legally binding eviction notice for the small 2-bedroom condo I rented from my parents in Atlanta. They owned the building and had always held the lease over my head as a method of control, reminding me constantly that I lived under their roof and by their rules. They were officially giving me 48 hours to vacate the premises and surrender the keys. Valerie had attached a typed message to the legal document. I read her toxic words while standing in my new multi-million-dollar reality. She stated that since I wanted to act like a disrespectful stray walking out on my sister's birthday dinner and refusing to foot the bill for my own family, they were immediately cutting off my housing privileges. She wrote that it was time I learned how the real cold world works, and that I would not be allowed back into the safety of the family circle until I crawled back with a sincere written apology and a cashier's check for the dinner I ruined. She actually typed the words, "You have always needed our charity to survive, and now you will see what happens when that charity dries up." They truly believed taking away a cramped, outdated apartment would break my spirit. They thought the threat of sudden homelessness would force me to my knees, begging for their mercy and forgiveness. They thought they still held the leash tightly in their hands, pulling me back into the dirt where they decided I belonged. I looked at the petty eviction notice displayed on the tiny screen of the cheap burner phone. Then I lifted my gaze and looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the towering vastness of the Rocky Mountains, where my $25 million isolated estate awaited my arrival. I pictured the heated stone floors, the private security gates, the absolute impenetrable peace of a home built entirely on my own unmatched success. I smiled. It was a wide, genuine smile of absolute total liberation. I walked over to the heavy stainless steel trash can, sitting in the corner of the executive suite. I held the burner phone over the open rim. I did not type a response defending myself. I did not beg for more time to move my belongings. I simply opened my hand and dropped the phone inside. It hit the metal bottom with a highly satisfying thud. The final toxic tie was permanently severed. The air up here is different. It does not just fill your lungs, it cleanses them. Stepping into my Aspen estate, for the first time, felt like stepping into an entirely new dimension of existence. The heavy reinforced oak doors clicked shut behind me, sealing away 32 years of constant noise and unearned disrespect. I walked slowly across the heated slate floors, taking in the sheer scale of my new reality. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls wrapped around the main living space, offering an unobstructed, breathtaking view of the snow-capped Rocky Mountains. There were no framed photographs of Chloe achieving mediocre milestones, while my accomplishments were shoved into a bottom drawer. There was no booming voice from Desmond demanding I drop everything to fix his laptop before dinner. There was only absolute pristine silence. For a woman who had spent her entire life drowning in the chaotic, toxic demands of an ungrateful family, that silence was the ultimate luxury. I spent my first night sleeping on a custom velvet sofa in the great room, just watching the snow fall over the pines. I did not need their validation anymore. I did not need to perform backbreaking labor to earn my right to exist in their space. I owned the mountain. Days turned into weeks, and the weeks seamlessly melted into months. 6 months passed since the humid night I walked out of that Atlanta restaurant and left my past on the table. I executed a complete and total ghosting protocol. I wiped my digital footprint utterly clean. I deleted every social media account, depriving my mother of her favorite pastime of stalking my pages to find things to criticize. I left no forwarding address for my father to send his condescending holiday cards or petty eviction notices. I became a phantom, a ghost, who just happened to possess a 9-figure bank account. Instead of wasting my energy trying to explain my worth to people who were fiercely committed to misunderstanding me, I channeled every ounce of my focus into my wealth management. I built an aggressive high-yield investment portfolio. I expanded my reach into sustainable technology and commercial real estate across the West Coast. I woke up at 5 every morning not to slave over my family's broken accounting software, but to review global market trends and close deals that shifted millions of dollars. Back in Georgia, I knew exactly what narrative Valerie was spinning to her church friends and country club associates. She was undoubtedly playing the role of the heartbroken, long-suffering mother, claiming her troubled, envious daughter had run away in a fit of shame after a jealous outburst. Let her have her fictional story to save face. I had my reality to keep me warm. But just because I was invisible did not mean I was blind. Through Malcolm and his extensive network of corporate analysts, I kept a very close and calculated eye on Sterling Logistics. My father's company was a fragile house of cards, and I had been the only structural support keeping the wind out. For years, I had silently patched their compliance software, working late into the night to ensure their massive fleet of trucks met federal regulations. I audited their taxes for free, catching severe discrepancies that their overpriced country club accountants completely missed. I did it out of a misplaced sense of loyalty, buying into that toxic narrative that the strong Black woman must bear the weight of her entire family on her shoulders. I believed that if I just worked hard enough to protect the family legacy, I would finally earn my seat at the head of the table. But without me actively managing their digital infrastructure, Sterling Logistics hit a brick wall at full speed. I watched from 2,000 miles away as the data painted a picture of total catastrophic collapse. They were missing mandatory compliance deadlines. Their routing algorithms were failing, causing massive shipment delays and furious vendors. Client contracts were bleeding out to aggressive competitors. Desmond had always treated my cybersecurity and data expertise as basic administrative work, viewing my labor as a limitless free resource he was entitled to. I thought logistics was just about diesel fuel and warehouse muscle, completely ignoring that my code was the central nervous system of his operation. Now he was learning the true devastating cost of my absence. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. The mountain air was sharp, and the sun was just breaking over the peaks, casting a brilliant golden light across the fresh snow. I was sitting on my heated terrace, wrapped in a thick cashmere blanket, sipping a perfect cup of dark roast coffee. My encrypted phone vibrated against the glass table. It was Malcolm. I answered, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. He did not bother with pleasantries. His voice was laced with a predatory kind of excitement, the tone of a brilliant lawyer who just found the smoking gun. "Aisha," he said, taking a breath to deliver the news. "Sterling Logistics just defaulted on a massive commercial loan. They are officially $4 million in the red, and the bank is threatening to seize their primary warehouse assets by the end of the month." I smiled, looking out at the majestic mountains. I knew they would stumble and hemorrhage money without my software patches. But a $4 million default meant someone was actively bleeding the company dry from the inside. Desmond is reckless with his pride, but he is intensely paranoid about his cash flow. I replied, my mind racing through the variables. Who authorized the loan? I could practically hear Malcolm grinning through the speaker. "That is the best part, Aisha. The bank triggered an emergency audit because the collateral used to secure the loan was completely falsified. And you will never guess whose signature is on the fraudulent collateral documents." I paused, my coffee mug hovering halfway to my mouth. A slow realization dawned on me, connecting the extravagant lifestyle my sister suddenly flaunted with the missing corporate funds. "Preston," I said. Malcolm let out a sharp, triumphant laugh. "Exactly. Your golden sister's arrogant white husband has been embezzling corporate funds for months and forging the corporate guarantees himself." I set my mug down on the glass table. The warmth of the coffee was entirely replaced by the cold, thrilling realization of what was about to happen. The man who had mocked my side hustle while drinking my father's expensive bourbon, the man who had called me dead weight, was the very parasite destroying their entire empire from the inside out. I thought back to the countless times Desmond had praised Preston's aggressive business acumen, treating him like the son he always wanted, while treating his actual biological daughter like a nuisance. Preston had used his privilege and his proximity to the golden child to rob my father blind. And Desmond, blinded by his own biases and desperate need to maintain his elite social image, had handed him the keys to the vault. The poetic justice was almost too perfect. I did not have to lift a single finger to ruin them. I just had to step out of the way and let their own arrogance do the heavy lifting. The trap was not just set. They had built it, funded it, and walked right into it themselves. The mountain air outside my Aspen estate is thin and perfectly still, but the data flowing across my curved monitors is dense, loud, and heavy with impending ruin. I sit in my home office surrounded by walls of reinforced glass, watching the slow digital death of Sterling Logistics. I left Atlanta behind, but I did not leave myself blind. Through the encrypted backdoor channels I legally maintain as their former unpaid IT architect, I can see every flashing red alert on their mainframe. It is a symphony of failure playing out in real time across my screens. The numbers tell a story of absolute panic. Desmond is facing a brutal audit from the Internal Revenue Service. Red flags are popping up across all their commercial accounts. They are bleeding cash at an unsustainable rate. I watched the live feed of their corporate credit accounts taking hit after hit. The freight routing margins, which I used to manually correct every single Friday night to keep them compliant, are now wildly inaccurate. The federal government has noticed. The audit notifications are flooding their executive inboxes, marked with severe penalties and threats of asset seizure, right alongside the corporate hemorrhaging. Chloe is still treating the company accounts like her personal piggy bank. I see a pending transaction for a $12,000 shopping spree at an exclusive Atlanta boutique. Another notification pops up for a luxury medical spa retreat in Miami. She is swiping her platinum card with absolute reckless abandon, completely oblivious to the fact that her father's shipping empire is currently in a financial freefall. She is buying designer shoes while the company trucks cannot even afford diesel fuel. She thinks the money is infinite because she has never had to earn a single dime of it. She has spent her entire life insulated by my silent labor and Desmond's arrogant pride. I take a slow sip of my coffee and remember how Desmond used to hold court at the Oak Ridge Country Club. He would stand there with a glass of expensive scotch in his hand, his chest puffed out boasting to his elite circle of business owners about his immense wealth. He would always pull Chloe to his side, parading her around like a trophy. He would tell everyone that her elegant presence and her medical degree were the true inspiration behind his success. He called her the crown jewel of the Sterling family. Meanwhile, I was the one sitting in the sweltering server room in the basement of his warehouse untangling the massive coding errors his cheap contractors left behind. When his friends asked about me, Desmond would just wave his hand dismissively. He would say, "Aisha is good with computers," like I was a mechanic fixing a broken toaster. He treated my advanced cybersecurity expertise like blue-collar manual labor. I was just the help, the invisible worker keeping his engine running while he took all the credit and showered Chloe with the profits. But that engine is dead now. The monitoring software I built for Sterling Logistics operates on an automated subscription protocol. Since I left, they ignored the basic maintenance alerts. They ignored the renewal warnings. They stopped paying the external hosting fees because Desmond always thought digital infrastructure was a scam and a waste of money. He believed a business was run on handshakes and intimidation. Now the servers have initiated an automated lockout. I lean back in my chair and watch as dozens of frantic login attempts from their Atlanta headquarters fail in real time. Access denied. Access denied. Access denied. The notifications roll down my screen like a beautiful waterfall. They cannot view their own shipping manifests. Their entire fleet of trucks is sitting idle at weigh stations across the country because the drivers cannot access the routing software. Desmond is paying teams of expensive external IT contractors triple their normal rate to crack the system, but they cannot bypass the security walls I designed. They are locked out of their own empire because they refuse to respect the architect who built the gates. The panic reaches a boiling point. The looming IRS audit forces Desmond to stop screaming at his computers and actually look at the raw financial statements from their backup physical banks. I monitor the frantic correspondence between Valerie and Desmond through their compromised business emails. They are scrambling, terrified of the federal government stripping their personal assets to cover the corporate penalties. They cancel their weekend galas. They stop answering calls from their country club friends. They sit down and manually crunch the numbers, looking for the funds they need to pay off the immediate tax liabilities. The reality hits them like a freight train. They look at the operating budget and find a gaping, unexplainable hole. They are exactly $4 million in the red. It is not a minor accounting error. It is a massive, catastrophic drain of their wealth. I watch the digital exchanges between my parents escalate into pure hysteria as they desperately trace the missing funds. They follow the money trail through a maze of shell companies and phantom vendor invoices. They pull the authorization logs trying to figure out which external hacker managed to penetrate their accounts. But they finally hit the bedrock of the theft. They find the digital signature authorizing the fraudulent transfers. The footprint does not belong to a hacker. It does not belong to a rival shipping company. The name attached to the $4 million leak destroying their entire legacy is Preston. The mountain air outside my Aspen estate is thin and perfectly still, but the data flowing across my curved monitors is dense, loud, and heavy with impending ruin. I sit in my home office surrounded by walls of reinforced glass, watching the slow digital death of Sterling Logistics. I left Atlanta behind, but I did not leave myself blind. Through the encrypted backdoor channels I legally maintain as their former unpaid software architect, I can see every flashing red alert on their mainframe. It is a symphony of failure playing out in real time across my screens. The numbers tell a story of absolute panic. My father, Desmond, is facing a brutal audit from the Internal Revenue Service. Red flags are popping up across all their commercial accounts. They are bleeding cash at an unsustainable rate. I watch the live feed of their corporate credit accounts taking hit after hit. The freight routing margins, which I use to manually correct every single Friday night to keep them compliant, are now wildly inaccurate. The federal government has noticed. The audit notifications are flooding their executive inboxes marked with severe penalties and threats of asset seizure. Right alongside the corporate hemorrhaging, my sister Chloe is still treating the company accounts like her personal piggy bank. I see a pending transaction for a $12,000 shopping spree at an exclusive Atlanta boutique. Another notification pops up for a luxury medical spa retreat in Miami. She is swiping her platinum card with absolute reckless abandon, completely oblivious to the fact that her father's shipping empire is currently in a financial freefall. She is buying designer shoes while the company trucks cannot even afford diesel fuel. She thinks the money is infinite because she has never had to earn a single dime of it. She has spent her entire life insulated by my silent labor and Desmond's arrogant pride. I sit back and watch the transactions flow across my screen like a digital confession. The reality of their situation hits them like a freight train when the bank freezes their primary operating account. Desmond and my mother Valerie look at the operating budget and find a gaping, unexplainable hole. They are exactly $4 million in the red. It is not a minor accounting error. It is a massive, catastrophic drain of their wealth. I watch the digital exchanges between my parents escalate into pure hysteria as they desperately trace the missing funds. They follow the money trail through a maze of shell companies and phantom vendor invoices. They pull the authorization logs trying to figure out which external hacker managed to penetrate their accounts. But they finally hit the bedrock of the theft. They find the digital signature authorizing the fraudulent transfers. The footprint does not belong to a hacker. It does not belong to a rival shipping company. The name attached to the $4 million leak destroying their entire legacy is Preston. Preston did not even try to cover his tracks with any real sophistication. He relied entirely on the fact that Desmond never looked at the raw data and that I was no longer around to audit the weekly logs. I pull up the offshore routing numbers. He dumped hundreds of thousands of dollars into unregulated sports betting syndicates. But the bulk of the missing $4 million went straight to a shell company in Miami. A few simple keystrokes reveal the sole proprietor of that company is a 24-year-old aspiring model. Preston bought her a luxury condo and a custom sports car using the exact funds Desmond needed to keep his freight trucks on the road. My sister Chloe is sitting in Atlanta, bragging about her perfect marriage to her hospital colleagues while her white husband is funding a secret second life with stolen family money. Desmond always viewed Preston as the ideal corporate successor simply because he looked the part and spoke the language of generational wealth that Desmond desperately wanted to align with. Desmond handed Preston the keys to the kingdom while demanding I clean the floors. It makes the betrayal that much sweeter to watch. The fallout happens fast. I do not just watch the financial numbers anymore. I activate the dormant audio diagnostic tools I left on their executive boardroom communication system. I originally installed it to monitor server ambient noise to prevent hardware overheating. Today it broadcasts the destruction of the Sterling family directly into my Aspen office. Desmond pulls Preston into the boardroom. I hear the heavy oak doors slam shut. My father explodes. His voice shakes the microphone receptors. He calls Preston a thief and a parasite. He demands every single penny back immediately. He screams that he is calling the authorities and that Preston will rot in a federal cell for corporate espionage and grand larceny. Desmond is unleashing all the fury of a proud patriarch who realizes he let a fox into the henhouse simply because the fox flattered his ego. But Preston does not beg for mercy. He does not apologize. Through the audio feed, I hear the sickening sound of Preston laughing. It is a cold, arrogant chuckle from a man who knows exactly how to exploit my father's deepest fears. Preston tells Desmond to pick up the phone. He dares him to call the federal investigators. But then Preston drops his own bomb. He reminds Desmond about the phantom freight manifests from 3 years ago. He details the inflated asset depreciation logs and the illegal tax shelters Desmond set up to hide company profits from the Revenue Service. Preston knows every single dirty secret because he is the one who helped Valerie manipulate the quarterly reports to maintain their lavish lifestyle. "If you call the police," Preston says, his voice dripping with condescension, "we both go down. I go away for embezzlement, and you go to prison for 10 years for federal tax evasion. The government will seize your house, your cars, and Chloe will be the laughingstock of Atlanta. So go ahead, Desmond. Make the call." The silence in the boardroom is heavy and suffocating. My father, a man who spent his life barking orders and intimidating everyone around him, is completely neutralized by his own corruption. Then I hear the boardroom door open. My mother, Valerie, steps into the fray. She has clearly been listening from the hallway. Her voice is trembling, but it is calculating. Valerie does not care about the law. She only cares about the country club. She cannot lose her status. She cannot let her friends find out they are bankrupt. And she absolutely refuses to let Chloe suffer the humiliation of a public divorce from a cheating thief. Valerie proposes a solution. They cannot go to the police and they cannot absorb a $4 million loss. They need a fall guy. They need a criminal to present to the auditors to explain the missing funds and clear Desmond of any wrongdoing. They need someone who had unrestricted administrative access to the financial servers at the exact time the money started bleeding out. My mother says my name. She says Aisha can take the fall. When I hear my mother suggest my name, a deep, profound coldness settles in my chest. I sit in my heated mountain fortress and feel a chill that has nothing to do with the Colorado snow. I listen to my own mother pitch a plan to frame me for a federal crime. She rationalizes it instantly to soothe whatever microscopic conscience she has left. I remember being 12 years old, and Valerie grounding me for a month because I accidentally spilled water on the kitchen floor, while Chloe actively stole money from her purse and received a hug. The dynamic has never changed. It has only escalated from petty childhood punishments to federal prison sentences. She tells Desmond and Preston that I have always been a bitter, jealous child. She says that since I walked out on them at the restaurant, I clearly planned to ruin them out of spite. They convince each other that I am just a struggling tech worker, living paycheck to paycheck. They assume I will never have the money to hire a defense attorney to fight a massive corporate lawsuit. Their plan is sickeningly simple. They are going to backdate the fraudulent offshore transfers and attach my legacy administrative credentials to the digital paperwork. They are going to blame the missing $4 million on a disgruntled, estranged daughter. Preston gets to keep his freedom. Desmond gets to keep his company. And Chloe gets to keep her illusion of a perfect marriage. I am the only casualty. They agree to the plan. I hear the clinking of glasses. They are pouring my father's expensive bourbon to toast their brilliant strategy. They are drinking to my destruction. I turn off the audio feed. I do not cry. I do not break things. I just breathe in the absolute silence of my home. My family has officially crossed the line from toxic to criminal. They have given me every justification I will ever need to dismantle their lives completely. Later that evening, the sun dips behind the snowy peaks, leaving the mountain in deep purple twilight. I am standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows watching the shadows stretch across the pines when my encrypted phone rings. It is Malcolm. His security team has been monitoring the digital perimeter we set up around my identity. Aisha, he says, his voice tight with urgency. They just authorized an illegal background check using a shady private investigator out of Georgia. They are actively hunting for you. My team intercepted their communications. They are drafting a liability transfer document disguised as a family trust payout. They plan to trick you into signing it, making you assume the entire $4 million debt and admitting fault for the missing funds. I keep my eyes on the darkening horizon. What did they find, Malcolm? They found the dummy post office box we set up in Colorado, he confirms. They pulled the public records and saw it is registered to your name. They think you are renting a cheap room in a ski town, trying to scrape by on tourist season tech support jobs. They are mobilizing, Aisha. They are coming for you. A slow smile spreads across my face. They think they are hunting a wounded animal. They do not realize they are walking straight into the jaws of an apex predator. I look at the flawless, impenetrable fortress I have built around myself. Let them find me, I say into the phone, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. It is time to set the trap. The morning sun was barely cresting the jagged snow-covered peaks of Aspen when the notification chimed on my secure monitor. It bypassed my standard corporate spam filters because I had specifically whitelisted my mother's primary email address late last night. The subject line glowed on the screen reading Family Trust and Reconciliation. I clicked open the message and leaned back in my heated leather executive chair, letting the heavy silence of my mountain fortress surround me. The text was dripping with a manufactured sickly sweet affection that Valerie only ever deployed when she was actively setting a trap. She started the email by calling me her dearest Aisha, a term of false endearment she had not used since I was 8 years old. She wrote lengthy paragraphs about how much the entire family missed me, how the profound silence of the past 6 months had torn a gaping hole in her heart, and how Desmond was losing sleep over our unfortunate estrangement. She painted a picture of a grieving family desperate to bring their lost daughter back into the fold. Then came the pitch. Valerie claimed that our late grandmother had left a small, undeveloped plot of land in a remote part of Colorado. She wrote that Desmond had recently uncovered the old property paperwork during a routine audit of the family trust. According to Valerie, they wanted to make amends for the ugly misunderstanding at the restaurant in Atlanta. They wanted to sign the deed over to me entirely as a peace offering. She explicitly mentioned that they knew I was struggling to make ends meet with my little computer business, and they hoped this property would provide me with a fresh start in the harsh winter climate. I stared at the glowing screen, feeling a familiar spike of cold disgust in my chest. My grandmother was a hardworking Black woman who poured every ounce of her energy and savings into building a secure foundation for her children. Desmond and Valerie had bled her dry in her final years, draining her retirement accounts to fund Chloe's lavish medical school lifestyle and Preston's elite country club memberships. There was no secret plot of land in Colorado. My grandmother died with nothing but the clothes in her closet because my parents took everything else. Furthermore, Valerie only ever invoked my grandmother's memory when she needed me to take the fall for a catastrophic mistake. When Chloe wrecked my father's luxury sedan at 19, driving recklessly after a party, Valerie sat me down at the kitchen table, held my hands tightly, and told me to confess to the police because Grandma would want us to protect your sister's bright medical career. They were running the exact same play right now, just on a multi-million-dollar scale. They wanted a scapegoat and they were using a dead woman's memory as the bait. Attached to the email was a 40-page PDF document labeled Quitclaim Deed and Trust Transfer. I did not even bother reading the first introductory paragraph. I forwarded the file directly to Malcolm on our encrypted corporate channel and requested an immediate video conference. Malcolm appeared on my secondary screen less than 3 minutes later. He was already sitting at his massive oak desk in Denver, a steaming cup of dark coffee in his hand, and a look of absolute professional revulsion twisting his features. "They really think you are an idiot," Malcolm said, skipping any polite morning greetings. "I am running the document through our forensic legal software right now, but I do not even need an artificial intelligence assistant to see the trap. This is one of the clumsiest, most arrogant pieces of legal fiction I have ever seen in my entire career as an attorney. Preston clearly drafted this himself to save money on external counsel. I asked him to break it down for me." Malcolm shared his screen, highlighting a dense block of text buried deep on page 32 of the PDF. They wrapped a massive liability transfer inside a standard property deed. Malcolm explained, his cursor circling the venomous clauses. Section 8, paragraph C outlines a complete assumption of corporate debt. If you sign this paper to accept this imaginary piece of mountain property, you are legally admitting to bypassing the security protocols of Sterling Logistics. You are signing a legally binding confession stating that you unilaterally authorized the transfer of $4 million to offshore accounts without executive approval. It indemnifies Preston completely and makes you the sole responsible party for the missing funds, the embezzlement, and the resulting federal tax penalties. I shook my head, absorbing the sheer audacity of their plan. They thought because I dropped out of my prestigious university program years ago to manage my severe anxiety and depression that I lacked basic reading comprehension. They assumed I was just a broke, desperate college dropout living in a tiny rented room in a freezing tourist town. They banked entirely on the idea that the promise of a free piece of real estate would make me so blindly grateful that I would eagerly sign a 40-page document without paying a lawyer to read the fine print. They thought my perceived poverty would guarantee my immediate compliance. Malcolm was furious on my behalf. He slammed his hand on his desk, making his coffee spill over the rim of his mug. Aisha, give me the word, and I will forward this entire email thread to the federal investigators right now. We have them dead to rights. This document is undeniable proof of a conspiracy to commit fraud and extortion. We can have the FBI raiding Desmond's corporate headquarters and Preston's house before lunch. We can end this today and put them all behind bars. I looked at the blazing red highlights on Malcolm's screen. A quick legal kill would be incredibly efficient, but it would not be justice. Sending federal agents to Atlanta would allow Desmond and Preston to hide behind their expensive defense attorneys. It would give Valerie the perfect opportunity to play the victim on the local news, crying to her community about how her vindictive runaway daughter hacked their systems and destroyed their hard-earned legacy. I did not want them to face a faceless federal agent in a sterile courtroom. I wanted them to face me. I wanted them to stand in the center of the empire they said I could never build and realize their absolute powerlessness. No, I told Malcolm, my voice deadly calm and perfectly measured. If we involve the authorities right now, they will just deny everything, claim ignorance, and drag us into a years-long court battle. They will claim Preston downloaded a boilerplate document from the internet and included the wrong clauses by mistake. I want them to bring the trap directly to my front door. I want them to look me in the eye when they try to ruin my life so I can watch their faces when the illusion shatters. I instructed Malcolm to hold off on the federal filings, but to prepare the counter-strike documents immediately. I pulled up a blank reply window to my mother's email. I had to play the part they expected. I had to become the desperate, starving scapegoat they designed this elaborate trap to catch. I typed slowly, deliberately, stripping away all of my professional vocabulary and corporate confidence. I wrote that I was so surprised and incredibly grateful to hear from them after all this time. I typed that things had been really hard for me lately, that I was struggling to pay for basic heating in the harsh Colorado winter, and that a piece of land from Grandma would solve all of my current financial problems. I made sure to sound appropriately pathetic, broken, and desperate for their validation. I thanked them profusely for giving me a second chance to be part of the family. Then I added the final crucial condition to seal the trap. I wrote that I was completely willing to sign the documents immediately, but there was a major problem. I told Valerie that my tech business had completely failed, and I did not have a single dollar in my bank account to afford a commercial flight back to Atlanta to execute the paperwork in person. I told them that if they wanted this signed quickly, they would have to bring the papers directly to me. I hit send. I leaned back in my chair and took a sip of my coffee, watching the snow fall outside my floor-to-ceiling windows. The bait was in the water. I knew their greed and their intense desperation to avoid federal prison would override any logical hesitation. They would not pay for a remote notary or a legal courier because they wanted to ensure I was physically intimidated into signing without reading. They needed to hover over me and apply pressure. They would book the flights. They would come to Colorado. They would walk straight into my world. The reply hit my inbox less than 20 minutes after I sent my conditions. Valerie did not argue about the cost of the flights or the inconvenience of traveling in the dead of winter. She eagerly agreed to come to Colorado. Her quickness was the loudest confirmation of their total desperation. In the past, getting my family to drive across Atlanta to attend my college graduation was treated as an insurmountable burden. Valerie had complained for weeks about the traffic, and Desmond had checked his watch the entire ceremony. Now they were willing to drop everything and cross the country at a moment's notice, just to secure a signature that would save their own skin and destroy my future. I replied with the address of my Aspen estate. I deliberately left off the name of the property and the private gate code. I gave them only the raw street number and the zip code. Given the narrative they had constructed about my supposed failure, I knew exactly what they pictured in their minds. They envisioned a cramped, drafty apartment building, or a cheap short-term rental on the outskirts of a ski town where service workers lived. They expected to find me shivering in a tiny room, desperate for the $50,000 they were dangling in front of me. They were flying out under the assumption that they could barge through my front door, overwhelm me with their loud voices, and bully me into signing the paperwork before I even had a chance to put on my reading glasses. They thought they were walking into a slaughterhouse where I was the lamb. They had no idea I owned the entire farm. I did not prepare a guest room for my family. I did not fluff pillows or stock the guest bathrooms with fresh towels or arrange welcome baskets. I transformed the great room of my $25 million fortress into a corporate execution chamber. I called Malcolm and told him it was time. He flew in from Denver on a private charter, bringing two of my top wealth managers and a forensic accountant. My private security team, led by a towering, no-nonsense professional named Jackson, locked down the perimeter of the estate. I briefed Jackson on exactly who was coming and how they were to be treated. There would be no valet service. There would be no warm greetings. I had my team clear the massive custom-built stone dining table, moving it to the center of the room so it resembled a stark boardroom table. At one end of the stone surface, I had my tech team install a massive interactive digital display screen. It lowered from the vaulted ceiling like a guillotine blade, hovering silently above the slate floor. We linked the screen directly to the encrypted servers, holding every piece of damning financial evidence against Desmond Preston and Chloe. We loaded the offshore bank statements, the timestamps of the fraudulent transfers, and the high-resolution photographs of Preston's mistress flaunting the stolen jewelry. Everything was queued up and ready to be deployed with a single tap on my tablet. I arranged the seating so that I would sit at the head of the table with the snowy mountain peaks framing my silhouette. My family would be forced to sit opposite me with the glaring digital evidence hovering right above their heads, casting a harsh light on their impending ruin. The morning of their arrival, I sat on my heated terrace with a cup of black coffee, tracking their journey in real time. Through my remaining backdoor access to the Sterling Logistics travel booking accounts, I pulled up their flight itinerary. I actually had to laugh out loud when the flight details populated on my screen. Desmond, the man who used to boast loudly at the country club about chartering private jets just for a weekend golf tournament, had booked 4 tickets on a budget commercial airline. They were not even flying first class. They were wedged into basic economy seats, fighting for overhead bin space and cramped legroom. Chloe, who once threw a legendary tantrum because a 5-star hotel booked her in a junior suite instead of the penthouse, was currently sitting in a middle seat near the back of a commercial cabin. I could only imagine the horrific mood she was in, being forced to rub elbows with the everyday people she constantly looked down upon. The financial rot consuming their empire was undeniable. They were hemorrhaging cash so rapidly that they could not even afford the illusion of wealth for a cross-country flight. They were spending their last remaining dollars just to reach me, believing my signature was the magic spell that would restore their kingdom and keep Preston out of a federal prison cell. The weather in Aspen that afternoon was brutal and unforgiving. A heavy snowstorm had moved in, blanketing the mountain roads in thick white powder and dropping the temperature to bone-chilling levels. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my great room, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water. Malcolm stood to my right, adjusting his tailored suit, while my wealth managers took their positions silently at the table. Jackson touched his earpiece and gave me a curt nod. The perimeter sensors had just been tripped. I watched the winding mountain road leading up to my property. Through the swirling snow, a vehicle slowly emerged. It was not a luxury black car service or a high-end chauffeured SUV. It was a standard compact rental car, struggling for traction on the steep, icy incline. They had rented the cheapest available vehicle at the airport, completely unprepared for the reality of the harsh Colorado terrain. The tiny SUV crawled up the mountain, slipping and sliding, its tires spinning uselessly against the snow before finally coming to a halt directly in front of my massive, heavy iron security gates. The gates stood 20 feet tall, flanked by stone pillars and high-definition security cameras. The imposing structure completely blocked their path, forcing them to face the fact that they were no longer dealing with a helpless scapegoat. I watched as the driver's side door of the cheap rental car opened. Preston stepped out into the freezing wind, pulling his thin designer coat tightly around his shoulders. He looked exactly like a man out of his depth, a corporate parasite shivering in an environment built for predators. He looked up at the towering iron gates and the expansive glass mansion looming on the peak above him, his arrogant face contorting in pure confusion. I took a slow sip of my water as the snow swirled around his expensive leather shoes. The wolves had arrived. I watched the cheap rental SUV struggling up the icy mountain road. The tires spun uselessly against the thick snow before finally coming to a halt directly in front of my heavy iron security gates. I stood behind the floor-to-ceiling glass of my great room, holding a warm cup of coffee, while my legal team waited silently behind me. I tapped the audio control on my tablet, routing the external gate microphones directly into the room. Jackson, my head of security, stepped out of the heated guardhouse. He is a mountain of a man built like a fortress, and he operates with absolute zero tolerance for entitlement. The driver's side window of the rental car rolled down, and a blast of freezing wind hit Preston right in the face. Preston leaned out of the window trying to look authoritative, but his teeth were already beginning to chatter. "We are here to see Aisha Sterling," he barked into the freezing air. "Just open the gate. She knows we are coming." Jackson stood completely still, his face a mask of professional indifference. He demanded government-issued identification from every passenger in the vehicle before he would even confirm if my name was on the resident registry. I could hear Desmond shouting from the back seat. Desmond demanded to know who Jackson thought he was dealing with, screaming that he was the chief executive officer of Sterling Logistics and that he did not have time to play games in the snow. Jackson simply stared at him, unblinking. He informed my father that titles meant nothing at this gate, and without identification, they would be ordered to turn around immediately. I listened through the hidden microphones as Preston turned around in the driver's seat and laughed to my sister Chloe. "She probably works as the maid for whoever owns this compound." Preston scoffed, his voice dripping with his usual brand of arrogant condescension. "Let us just get her to sign this liability transfer so she can get back to scrubbing toilets." Hearing those words did not hurt me. They validated every single defensive measure I had built into this trap. I pressed the intercom button, connecting me directly to Jackson's earpiece. "Execute Protocol 2, I instructed, my voice steady and cold. Jackson immediately ordered all four of them to turn off the engine and step out of the vehicle. Valerie gasped in loud theatrical horror, protesting that she was wearing expensive Italian leather boots and could not possibly be expected to step into ankle-deep snow. Jackson did not care about her footwear. I informed them that the owner of the estate required all guests to surrender their mobile devices, laptops, and any recording equipment for strict confidentiality purposes before setting foot on the property. Chloe threw an absolute tantrum right there in the front seat. She shrieked that her phone had her entire life on it, and she refused to hand it over to a glorified mall cop. She yelled that she needed her phone to document the She shrieked that her phone had her entire life on it, and she refused to hand it over to a glorified mall cop. She yelled that she needed her phone to document the trip and that nobody had the right to confiscate her property. Desmond tried to use his booming patriarch voice to intimidate Jackson into backing down. It failed miserably. Jackson simply crossed his arms and stated that if they did not surrender their digital devices immediately, they would be escorted off the mountain by force. The desperate need to secure my signature on their fraudulent debt transfer outweighed their temporary outrage. They knew they needed a scapegoat for the missing $4 million, or Desmond and Preston would both be facing federal prison time. One by one, they reluctantly handed their phones through the open window into Jackson's collection box. They were now completely disconnected from the outside world. They had no cameras to record their lies. They had no way to call their lawyers for backup. They were entirely at my mercy in a territory they did not understand. Jackson then informed them that external vehicles were strictly prohibited past the primary security gates. They would have to leave the rental car at the bottom of the hill and take the estate transport up to the main house. The estate transport was an open-air utility golf cart designed for moving landscaping equipment across the property in the summer. It was not designed for transporting delicate Atlanta socialites in the middle of a Colorado blizzard. My family was forced to climb out of the heated car and pile into the back of the freezing cart. I stood in my warm great room looking down through the glass walls as the cart began its slow, agonizing crawl up my mile-long winding driveway. The temperature outside was dropping rapidly toward single digits. A harsh mountain wind whipped down the canyon carrying biting snow that stung their exposed faces. They had flown from the humid south packing thin designer coats, meant for walking the short distance from a valet stand to a heated country club. They were woefully unprepared for the brutal reality of winter at high elevation. Valerie clutched her thin cashmere shawl around her shoulders, shaking violently as the snow accumulated on her perfectly styled hair. Chloe hugged her knees to her chest, her teeth chattering so loudly the sound carried through the security microphones mounted along the driveway. Preston looked utterly miserable, his arrogant smirk completely frozen off his face as he gripped the metal handles of the golf cart. Desmond sat rigidly trying to maintain his dignity, while his expensive wool business coat became soaked and heavy with melting ice. For 32 years, they had left me out in the cold emotionally and financially. They had watched me struggle to pay my rent while I worked 3 jobs to fund Chloe's medical school applications. They had watched me sacrifice my own mental health to fix their broken corporate servers for free, and they had never offered me a single shred of warmth or gratitude. Now they were experiencing a physical manifestation of the exact same freezing isolation they had subjected me to my entire life. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the dark roast warm my throat as I enjoyed the view of their suffering. The golf cart finally pulled up to the grand entrance of my estate. The structure was a breathtaking marvel of modern architecture, blending dark steel, natural stone, and massive panes of reinforced glass. It was designed to look both exceptionally beautiful and fiercely intimidating. My family stepped off the cart, slipping clumsily on the icy paving stones. They huddled together under the massive covered portico, desperately seeking shelter from the howling wind and looking around in total bewilderment. As they approached the heavy oak double doors, the automated biometric sensors triggered. The massive doors swung inward silently, revealing the cavernous heated foyer of my home. A wave of warm cedar-scented air washed over their frozen faces. They stepped cautiously inside, their eyes wide with shock as they took in the sheer scale of the space. The floor was cut from imported seamless black marble, reflecting the golden glow of a modern art chandelier suspended 30 feet above their heads. Original abstract paintings lined the stone walls, communicating a level of generational wealth that made Desmond's logistics company look like a lemonade stand. It was a space that radiated absolute, unyielding power. They stood shivering in the center of the foyer, dripping melted snow all over my pristine marble floor. I watched them from the hidden vantage point of the second-floor mezzanine, blending into the shadows. I could hear their hushed, anxious voices carrying up to me. They were looking around the magnificent entryway, completely overwhelmed by the opulence, whispering among themselves, and searching desperately for the broke maid they had come to exploit. They did not see me yet. I let them stand there in the center of my foyer for exactly 3 minutes. I wanted the biting mountain cold they carried in on their clothes to clash violently with the radiant heat of my floors. I wanted the overwhelming silence of the estate to press down on their chests. From my hidden vantage point on the second-floor mezzanine, I watched my mother Valerie shiver uncontrollably, her thin designer coat plastered to her shoulders. My sister Chloe was frantically rubbing her arms, her teeth chattering so loudly the sound bounced off the imported black marble beneath her feet. My father Desmond stood rigid, trying to project his usual dominant aura, but failing miserably, while water dripped from his frozen collar. Preston simply looked furious, shifting his weight and muttering complaints about the lack of valet service. They were ready to be broken. I stepped out from the shadows of the mezzanine. My bare feet made a soft, deliberate sound against the first step of the floating glass staircase. I wore bespoke cream cashmere loungewear that draped flawlessly over my frame. It was the kind of effortless, quiet luxury that screamed generational wealth without displaying a single visible logo. Behind me, Malcolm stepped into the light. I was flanked by Julian and Carmen, two of the most ruthless corporate litigators on my payroll. We moved in perfect synchronization, descending the glass steps, like a phalanx of silent executioners, preparing for a hostile takeover. Valerie spotted me first. She let out a sharp gasp and grabbed Desmond by the sleeve, digging her manicured nails into his wet coat. Desmond snapped his head up and his eyes widened in sheer disbelief. Chloe whipped around so fast the fake designer purse she was clutching slipped right out of her frozen fingers. It hit the marble floor with a dull, pathetic thud, spilling lipsticks and crumpled receipts into a puddle of melted snow. Chloe stared at me. Her eyes darted from my cashmere clothes to the towering glass walls, then to the three highly paid attorneys standing shoulder to shoulder behind me. Her brain simply refused to process the visual data. The fragile reality she had constructed, where she was the golden medical prodigy and I was the miserable failure, was violently malfunctioning. Chloe immediately defaulted to the only explanation her ego could survive. "Whose house are you? House sitting!" Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing harshly against the stone walls. "You are going to get fired for letting us in here, Aisha. I know you are desperate for cash, but dragging us to your boss's mansion is a new low even for you." Valerie eagerly grabbed onto that lifeline of denial. She stepped forward, pointing a trembling, freezing finger at me. "How dare you play these childish games with us?" Valerie scolded, her tone dripping with the same toxic condescension she used when I was a teenager. "We are freezing to death. Take us to the actual property we came to sign over and go fetch us some towels before the real owners call the police on you." I did not offer a single word of greeting. I did not signal my security team to gather their soaked coats. I did not offer to guide them into the great room where a massive fire was roaring in the custom stone hearth. I simply let them stand dripping and shivering in the puddle of their own melting ice. I kept my face entirely devoid of emotion, rendering their insults completely powerless. I walked past them without breaking my stride, projecting an aura of untouchable authority that Desmond had spent his entire life trying to fake. I walked straight into the center of the great room and approached the massive custom-built stone table. I took my seat at the head of the table. Malcolm, Julian, and Carmen seamlessly took their positions, standing behind my chair like a wall of tailored armor. The floor-to-ceiling glass windows behind me framed the jagged snow-covered peaks of the Rocky Mountains, casting me in a halo of brilliant winter sunlight. I was the absolute master of my domain. I looked directly at my father. I did not look at Valerie. I ignored Chloe completely. I locked eyes with the man who had authorized my expulsion from the family. "You flew 4 hours to get a signature." "Desmond," I said, my voice echoing with cold precision across the cavernous room. "Put the papers on the table." Desmond froze. The booming patriarch who commanded boardrooms and terrified his logistics employees was suddenly rendered entirely speechless. He looked at the vast expanse of the estate. He looked at the tailored perfection of my legal team. His business instincts finally pierced through his arrogant denial. He recognized the heavy silence of true power. Desmond realized in real time that this was not a cheap rental property, and I was not a desperate tenant. He recognized that he had just walked his entire family into a highly coordinated legal ambush. He gripped the thick manila envelope containing the fraudulent liability transfer tightly against his chest. He hesitated. He took a half step backward, his survival instinct screaming at him to turn around and run back to the freezing golf cart. But the power dynamic shift was entirely lost on Preston. Preston lacked the basic survival instinct required to recognize when he was outmatched. His white privilege and his deeply ingrained belief that I was nothing more than a convenient punching bag completely blinded him to the trap. He could not compute the reality of a black woman, let alone the family scapegoat, wielding this level of absolute financial dominance over him. Preston let out a loud, disgusted scoff. He snatched the manila envelope right out of Desmond's frozen grip. He marched aggressively across the great room, his wet leather shoes leaving dirty footprints across my pristine floors. He stormed up to the custom stone table and slammed the fraudulent documents down onto the polished surface with as much force as he could muster. He leaned over the table, invading my personal space, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me back into submission. "Sign it," Aisha Preston commanded. his face flushed red with a mixture of biting cold and furious entitlement. We do not have all day to play pretend. I look down at the thick manila envelope sitting on the polished stone surface. I do not pick up the pen he threw down next to it. I do not even lean forward. I keep my posture perfectly straight, projecting the absolute stillness of a woman who holds every single card in the deck. I reach out and place one manicured finger on the center of the envelope. I apply just enough pressure to slide the fraudulent documents right back across the table until they bump against Preston's wet leather belt. You really thought I was stupid enough to sign a blind liability transfer? I ask, my voice calm and conversational, as if we are discussing the weather outside. You thought you could wrap a full corporate debt assumption inside a fake property deed, and I would just blindly sign away my freedom because I was desperate for my parents' approval. You thought the broken college dropout would not hire a forensic legal team to read the fine print. I do not need the fake $50,000 from our grandmother's non-existent trust, Preston. I let the words land heavily in the silent room. My voice is quiet, but it carries the sharp edge of a newly sharpened blade. And I especially do not need it to cover the $4 million you wired to your offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The reaction is instantaneous and explosive. My mother Valerie lets out a loud theatrical gasp, pressing her hand to her chest, as if all the oxygen has been sucked out of the room. Desmond freezes his eyes, darting between me and the white man he chose to groom as his corporate heir. Preston goes completely pale. The arrogant flush of entitlement drains from his face so fast, he looks physically ill. He takes a sudden panicked step back, bumping into his own wife. But Preston is a man who has survived his entire life by gaslighting black women, and he immediately defaults to his favorite defense mechanism: anger. You are delusional, he shouts, pointing a shaking finger at my face. You are making up insane lies because you are bitter that we kicked you out. You hacked us. You hacked Sterling Logistics. That is a federal crime, Aisha. I will have you arrested for corporate espionage before the sun sets. He looks at Desmond, desperate to rally his father-in-law to his side. Tell her, Desmond. Tell this crazy woman she is going to prison for breaching our firewalls. Desmond steps forward, his patriarchal instinct kicking in. He tries to puff up his chest to intimidate me, the same way he did when I was a teenager, asking for basic respect. Aisha, what have you done? He demands, his voice booming with fake authority. If you have been messing around in my corporate servers, I swear I will let Preston call the authorities. We came here to give you a generous gift from your grandmother, and you repay us with this psychotic behavior. I let out a slow, humorless laugh. It is truly remarkable how deeply committed they are to their own delusions. I did not hack anything, I say, resting my hands on the cool stone table. When you arrogant fools locked me out of the family, you completely forgot that I am the sole architect of your entire digital infrastructure. I built the gates. I hold the master keys. And more importantly, I am the only one who bothered to read the automated alerts when your bank account started hemorrhaging cash. Preston slams his fist on his thigh. Lies. All of it. Valerie, do not listen to her. She is just trying to extort us because she is broke. I turn my attention to Malcolm, my lead attorney, standing silently behind my right shoulder. I hold out my hand. Malcolm places a sleek metallic remote control into my palm. I press a single silver button. Behind me, the massive floor-to-ceiling smart glass wall instantly darkens, blocking out the blinding glare of the snowy mountain peaks. A massive digital projector drops silently from the vaulted ceiling. The entire 30-foot wall behind me lights up, transforming my great room into a high-definition forensic accounting presentation. I point the remote at the screen. Let us talk about your definition of a generous gift, Desmond. Let us look at the exact reason you flew all the way across the country in economy-class seats, just to force a piece of paper in front of my face. The screen displays a crystal-clear spreadsheet pulled directly from the deepest layers of the Sterling Logistics financial database. I highlight the first row in blazing neon red. Here is the primary operating account for Sterling Logistics. I announce, my voice ringing with total authority. You will notice the balance dropping precipitously, starting exactly 3 months ago. And right here I click the remote again, zooming in on a specific transaction log. Here is the exact timestamp, showing a sequence of unauthorized wire transfers. $700,000 on a Tuesday, $1.2 million the following Friday, $2.1 million on the first of the month. Desmond is staring at the screen, his jaw completely unhinged. Valerie is gripping the edge of the stone table, her knuckles turning white. Preston is sweating now, despite the freezing temperature he just endured outside. He tries to interrupt, his voice cracking with sheer panic. That proves nothing. Anyone could have authorized those transfers. It was probably a phishing scam. We have been telling the bank it was a cyber attack. I smile. It is a terrifying smile. I know because I see Chloe physically flinch when I look at her. A phishing scam, I repeat mockingly. That is a very creative defense, Preston. Unfortunately for you, the digital footprint tells a very different story. You see, when you authorize these transfers, you use the encrypted executive terminal located inside Desmond's private home office. But you were too careless to use a virtual private network. I click the remote. The screen shifts to a new document displaying IP addresses and geographic tracking data. The digital signature on every single one of these transfers traces back to your specific executive login credentials, Preston. I built the system to flag irregular large-scale movements. I watched you siphon $4 million of my father's money into a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands under a holding company named Preston Global Enterprises. You did not even try to hide your name. You were so blinded by your own arrogance and so confident that Desmond would never check the raw data that you just walked through the front door and emptied the vault. Desmond turned slowly to look at his son-in-law. The realization is hitting him like a physical blow. The white corporate savior he had chosen over his own black daughter had just robbed him blind and left his company completely bankrupt. Preston Desmond whispers, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and absolute disbelief. Tell me this is a lie. Tell me she fabricated this. Preston is backing away toward the heavy oak doors, his eyes darting frantically around the room looking for an exit that does not exist. Desmond, listen to me. She manufactured this data. She is framing me because she hates that you chose me to run the company. It is a setup. I do not let him breathe. I do not let him control the narrative for a single second. I press the remote again. Oh, Preston, I say, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. We are not even close to being done. If you think the corporate embezzlement is bad, wait until Chloe sees where the money actually went. The screen shifts away from the dry financial spreadsheets. It is replaced by a massive high-resolution photograph. The image is crisp, bright, and undeniably real. It shows a stunning 24-year-old woman lounging on the deck of a multi-million-dollar yacht in Miami. She is wearing a tiny designer bikini, sipping a cocktail and laughing at the camera. Chloe lets out a confused breath. Her eyes narrow as she stares at the massive screen. Who is that? She asks, her voice trembling with sudden insecurity. Preston, why is she showing us this? Preston looks like he is going to throw up. He lunges forward, trying to grab the remote out of my hand, but Jackson, my head of security, intercepts him instantly. Jackson shoves Preston back so hard the man stumbles and crashes into the edge of the stone table, gasping for air. That is Mia, I announce, ensuring every single syllable echoes clearly in the cavernous room. She is a prominent luxury lifestyle influencer based in South Beach. She also happens to be the sole proprietor of the shell company receiving your stolen funds. Preston has been paying the lease on her luxury oceanfront condo for the past 2 years. Chloe covers her mouth with both hands, letting out a muffled, horrified sob. Valerie steps back, her eyes wide with shock, as the illusion of her perfectly curated family shatters into a million jagged pieces right in front of her face. But I am not finished. I promised myself I would dismantle their entire fake reality, and I intend to keep that promise. I click the remote one last time, zooming in closely on the wrist of the young woman in the photograph. The image enlarges until the glittering diamonds on her arm take up the entire 30-foot screen. Take a very close look at her wrist, Chloe, I command, pointing directly at the brilliant display. Does that jewelry look familiar to you? Chloe stares at the screen, her eyes tracing the intricate design of the diamonds. Her breathing becomes erratic, rapid, and shallow. Her entire body begins to shake with violent, uncontrollable tremors. That is my bracelet, Chloe whispers, her voice cracking in pure devastation. That is the custom diamond tennis bracelet, the one that went missing from my hotel room in Paris last year. I nod slowly, locking eyes with my sister. Exactly. The exact same tennis bracelet you and Preston reported stolen to the insurance company. The same bracelet you filed a fraudulent police report over, so you could collect a massive insurance payout to fund your lavish lifestyle. You lied to the authorities, Chloe. But Preston lied to you. He never lost the bracelet. He stole it from your hotel suite and gave it to his secret mistress in Miami. He has been funding his second life using my father's money and decorating his girlfriend using your jewelry. The room erupts into absolute total chaos. The psychological devastation I have unleashed is instantaneous and complete. The golden facade my family has maintained for decades is entirely obliterated. Chloe lets out a blood-curdling scream that tears through the serene silence of my mountain estate. She launches herself at Preston like a wild animal, her manicured hands turning into claws. She strikes him across the face, her rings catching his cheek and drawing a thin line of blood. "You miserable lying parasite," Chloe shrieks, hitting him again and again as he tries to shield his face. "You gave her my diamonds. You stole from my father to pay for some cheap Miami trash." Preston is shouting, trying to grab her wrists, but she is fighting with the hysterical strength of a woman whose entire identity has just been publicly destroyed. Valerie is crying hysterically, screaming for them to stop begging for someone to maintain decorum, as if the country club rules still apply while their lives are actively burning to the ground. Desmond steps into the fray, his face purple with a lethal combination of humiliation and unadulterated rage. He grabs Chloe by the waist, pulling her back from Preston, but his fury is not directed at the man who robbed him. In a stunning display of patriarchal toxicity, Desmond turns his blazing angry eyes directly toward me. "Stop it!" Desmond roars, his voice booming over the chaos. He points a thick, trembling finger at me, his face contorted with anger. "This is a private family matter, Aisha. You had no right to dig into our personal finances. You had no right to bring this filth into the open. You have disgraced this family, and you have absolutely no right to interfere in your sister's marriage." The sheer audacity of his statement hangs in the air. He is standing in the middle of my $25 million mansion, surrounded by evidence of a multi-million-dollar federal crime committed by the white man. He chose over me, and he still has the nerve to demand my submission. He still expects me to play the role of the obedient, silent scapegoat who cleans up their messes without complaint. I do not shrink back. I do not lower my gaze. I channel every single ounce of disrespect, isolation, and emotional abuse they have subjected me to for 32 years into one single physical action. I raise my hand high in the air and I slam my palm down flat against the solid stone table. The sound cracks through the room like a gunshot, echoing the exact same aggressive motion Chloe used when she threw me out of her birthday dinner 6 months ago. The sharp, violent noise instantly silences my mother's crying. It stops Chloe's hysterical struggling. It cuts off Desmond's arrogant yelling. The entire room freezes, staring at me in stunned, breathless silence. I stand up slowly, towering over the table, projecting the absolute terrifying power of a woman who has finally claimed her throne. I look my father dead in the eye, my voice dangerously soft, but carrying the weight of an oncoming avalanche. I have every right. Desmond turns his rage on me, his face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The veins in his neck bulge against the stiff collar of his damp designer shirt. For my entire life, this was the exact look that made everyone in our household shrink into the shadows. This was the booming, authoritative rage of a man who demanded absolute submission from his wife and his daughters. He steps aggressively toward the custom stone table, slamming his fist down in a pathetic attempt to reclaim his dominance in a room where he has absolutely zero power. "You vindictive little brat!" He shouts, his voice echoing sharply against the glass and marble walls of my mountain estate. "You hacked my company. You manufactured these fake banking records because you are obsessed with ruining your sister. I will have you arrested for this. I will call the federal authorities myself and watch them drag you out of this stolen mansion in handcuffs. I am still the chief executive officer of Sterling Logistics." He stands there, chest puffed out, breathing heavily, waiting for me to flinch. He expects the scared, overworked daughter, who used to apologize for things she never even did, just to keep the peace at the dinner table. He expects me to lower my eyes and shrink away from his booming voice. I do not move a single muscle. I remain perfectly seated in my leather chair, projecting an aura of absolute stillness. The massive digital screen behind me is still illuminating the room with the undeniable proof of Preston funneling millions of dollars to his Miami mistress, but Desmond is deliberately ignoring it. He is clinging to his fabricated title and his crumbling corporate empire, like a man drowning in a storm, refusing to grab the life preserver because he refuses to admit his ship is sinking. I look at Malcolm, my lead attorney, standing silently behind my right shoulder. I do not even have to speak. Malcolm anticipates the command. He reaches into his tailored leather briefcase and pulls out a single heavy red folder. He places it gently into my open palm. The folder is thick bound with legal seals and stamped with the official insignia of one of the largest commercial banks in the country. I place my hand flat on top of the red folder and push it slowly across the polished stone surface. The heavy cardboard makes a soft scraping sound as it slides directly in front of Desmond. He stares down at it as if it is a venomous snake preparing to strike. "You did not read the news, Dad." I say, my voice remaining completely conversational and terrifyingly calm. "Sterling Logistics went into receivership 48 hours ago. The bank auctioned off your primary debt." Desmond freezes. The aggressive posture he was desperately trying to maintain suddenly deflates. He looks from the red folder to my face, and then back to the folder. Behind him, Valerie lets out a confused, breathless sound. She steps forward, gripping the back of Desmond's jacket. "What does she mean?" "Desmond," she demands, her voice trembling with the first real wave of financial terror. "What does receivership mean? Tell her to stop talking in riddles." I do not wait for my father to explain his own failure to his wife. I am more than happy to provide the translation. "It means your husband is no longer the chief executive officer of anything," Valerie, I explain, keeping my eyes locked on Desmond. "It means that when Preston forged those collateral documents to secure a $4 million loan to pay for his secret beachfront lifestyle, he tripped a massive automated fraud alert at the bank. The federal auditors froze your primary operating accounts immediately. But they did not just stop at freezing your assets. When they looked in the raw data, they realized that Sterling Logistics was carrying $15 million in toxic commercial debt. Debt that you have been hiding for years using illegal tax shelters and inflated depreciation logs." Desmond opens his mouth to speak, but nothing comes out. He is suffocating on the truth. "Commercial banks do not like toxic assets, Desmond." I continue, my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the room. "When they realized your shipping empire was actually a bankrupt shell company, completely hollowed out by your own son-in-law, they initiated an emergency liquidation protocol. They packaged your $15 million debt, and they auctioned it off to the highest bidder just to get it off their books. They sold the rights to your entire corporate existence for pennies on the dollar to a private holding company." Preston is shaking his head violently, backing away toward the foyer. He is looking for a way out, but Jackson, my head of security, simply shifts his massive frame, blocking the only exit. "You cannot do that," Preston stammers, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "That takes months of legal proceedings. A bank cannot just auction a commercial loan in 2 days without a court order." Julian, one of my ruthless corporate litigators, steps forward from the shadows. He adjusts his glasses and looks at Preston with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a tumor. "Actually, under Section 9 of your specific commercial loan agreement, which you clearly did not read before you forged the signature, the bank retains the right to trigger an immediate accelerated default and auction in the event of proven financial fraud," Julian explains. "The moment the bank verified the fraudulent offshore wire transfers to Miami, they voided your grace period. It was entirely legal, perfectly executed, and ruthlessly efficient." I tap the red folder on the table. "Open it, Desmond," I command. "Read the paperwork. Read the name of the private holding company that purchased your debt." Desmond reaches out with a trembling hand. His fingers hesitate over the cover. He flips the red folder open. The top document is a heavily notarized notice of default and transfer of lien. He reads the bold black text at the top of the page. He reads the name of the purchasing entity. His eyes scan down to the bottom of the document, to the signature line belonging to the sole proprietor of that holding company. Desmond reads the paper. His hands begin to violently shake. The thick legal documents rattle against each other, amplifying the sound of his total destruction. He looks at the paper, and then he looks up at me. His face has lost all of its color, turning a sickening shade of gray. The man who used to mock my coding skills while sipping expensive scotch at the country club is currently experiencing a total psychological collapse. No, no, this is impossible, Desmond whispers, his voice cracking under the crushing weight of reality. Chloe pushes past Valerie and snatches the documents out of her father's shaking hands. She stares at the pages, her eyes darting back and forth across the legal jargon. She does not understand commercial real estate law, but she understands the name printed in bold ink at the bottom of the page. She understands my name. She understands the word owner. What does this mean? Chloe shrieks, dropping the papers back onto the stone table as if they burned her skin. What did you do, Aisha? I lean forward, resting my forearms on the table. The brilliant winter sunlight streaming through the glass windows catches the subtle diamond studs in my ears. I look at my sister, who spent her entire life believing she was genetically superior to me, simply because she knew how to play the game of Southern high society. I look at my mother, who smiled when I was thrown out of a restaurant into the humid Atlanta night. I look at Preston, the white corporate parasite who thought he could use my family as a personal piggy bank and frame a black woman for his crimes. And finally, I look directly into the broken, defeated eyes of my father. I did not hack you, I say, my voice dropping to an ice-cold register that commands absolute silence in the cavernous room. I bought your debt. I am your largest creditor. I own the warehouses, the trucks, the contracts. I own your entire legacy, and I am calling in the loan, today. The word today hangs in the air, suspended like a blade waiting to drop. You cannot call in a $15 million loan today. Valerie screams, her carefully maintained facade of Southern elegance completely shattering. She slams her hands against the side of her head, pacing erratically near the table. We do not have that kind of liquid cash. You know we do not have that kind of money. We will lose the house. We will lose the cars. We will lose everything. I tilt my head, feigning a brief moment of sympathy. That sounds like a terrifying situation, Valerie. It sounds exactly like the situation you deliberately tried to put me in when you sent that eviction notice to my apartment 6 months ago. You explicitly told me that I needed to learn how the cold, real world works. You told me that I was a disrespectful stray who needed to be taught a lesson about surviving without your charity. I am simply returning the favor. Welcome to the real world. Desmond slams his hands flat on the table, leaning heavily on his arms because his legs can no longer support his weight. Aisha, please, he begs, his voice entirely stripped of its former pride. You are angry, and you have every right to be angry. I was blind. I trusted Preston, and he destroyed us. But you cannot do this. You cannot destroy the company I spent 30 years building. It is our family name on those trucks. It is our blood in that business. I stand up, slowly rising to my full height. The movement forces Desmond to look up at me, cementing his physical and psychological submission. There is no family name on those trucks anymore, Desmond. I correct him. As of 8 o'clock this morning, my transition team began the rebranding process. The Sterling Logistics signs are currently being ripped off the sides of every single warehouse in Georgia. The trucks are being repainted. The corporate headquarters is currently locked down by my private security contractors. I fired your entire executive board 4 hours ago while you were squeezed into an economy-class seat drinking stale airline coffee. Chloe lets out a loud, agonizing wail. She drops to her knees on the cold marble floor, the reality of her new poverty fully setting in. My designer brand deals. She sobs, her hands covering her face. My hospital colleagues. Everyone in Atlanta is going to know we are bankrupt. I cannot show my face at the clinic. I cannot go to the country club. My entire life is ruined. Chloe spins around on the floor and points a shaking, furious finger at Preston. This is your fault, you miserable lying thief. You stole my life. You stole my money to buy a condo for a Miami swimsuit model. I am divorcing you. I will take every single thing you own. Preston lets out a bitter, harsh laugh, crossing his arms defensively. Take what, Chloe? He spits back, his facade of the perfect wealthy husband entirely dissolved. I own nothing. Your sister just bought all of it. And thanks to your father's brilliant strategy of hiding his assets in my name to avoid the IRS, she just seized my personal accounts too. I am just as broke as you are. Valerie rushes toward me, stopping just inches from the edge of the stone table. She looks up at me with wild, desperate eyes. Aisha, listen to me. We can fix this. You are a brilliant, successful woman. You have more money than you could ever spend. You do not need the logistics company. Give it back to your father. Sign the papers we brought. Let us handle Preston quietly. We can go back to Atlanta and be a family again. We can start over. I stare at the woman who gave birth to me. I look for any trace of genuine remorse, any hint of maternal love buried beneath her sheer panic. There is nothing. She is only begging because she has lost her credit cards. If Preston had succeeded in framing me, and I was currently sitting in a federal holding cell facing 10 years for embezzlement, Valerie would be sipping champagne at a charity gala, complaining to her friends about her troubled criminal daughter. We were never a family, Valerie. I say, my tone utterly devoid of emotion. We were a hostage situation. And I am the one who negotiated my own release. Desmond tries one final desperate tactic. He appeals to my professional logic, assuming the language of business is the only thing I respect. You are calling in a $15 million loan today, Aisha. You know we cannot pay it. That means you are forcing us into immediate personal bankruptcy. The bank will foreclose on the mansion in Atlanta. They will seize our personal retirement funds. We will be homeless. You are sentencing your own parents to live on the street. I nod, slowly confirming his assessment of the situation. Yes, Desmond, I say. That is exactly what happens when you leverage your personal assets to secure fraudulent corporate debt. It is basic economics. A subject you told me I was too stupid to understand when I was 19 years old. But I am not entirely heartless. I continue, gesturing to Julian. Julian opens his leather briefcase and pulls out a single crisp document. He slides it across the table, stopping it right next to the red folder. I know that facing sudden homelessness is a terrifying ordeal. I say, watching Desmond and Valerie stare at the new document. So I have drafted a solution, a liability transfer of my own. Valerie snatches the document off the table, her eyes scanning the text, desperately hoping for a lifeline. What is this? She asks, her voice trembling. It is a full confession, I state plainly. It details exactly how you, Desmond and Preston, conspired to commit federal wire fraud, tax evasion, and corporate embezzlement. It clearly states that you attempted to use a forged legal document to frame me for the theft of $4 million. It includes Preston's full admission of moving stolen funds across state lines to conceal assets from the Internal Revenue Service. Preston lunges forward, his eyes wide with terror. I am not signing a federal confession. That is a guaranteed prison sentence. Are you out of your mind? I look at Preston with absolute contempt. You will sign it, Preston, or I will hand the high-resolution photos of your mistress's stolen diamonds directly to the insurance fraud investigators. They are already curious about how a $30,000 tennis bracelet mysteriously vanished from a locked Parisian hotel suite. Insurance companies do not play nice with fraudulent claims. They will have you arrested before you even make it to the airport. I turn my attention back to my parents. If all three of you sign that confession right now in front of my legal team and surrender every single remaining asset you possess, I will not forward the document to the FBI. I will hold it in my private vault indefinitely. I will let you walk away from this mountain without handcuffs. You will be entirely bankrupt, entirely humiliated, and completely erased from high society, but you will be free. Desmond stares at the confession paper, his chest heaving as he takes shallow, panicked breaths. And if we refuse to sign it, he asks, his voice a hollow echo of the man he used to be. If you refuse, I say, my voice dropping to a final deadly pitch, I will hit send on an email that is currently drafted on Malcolm's tablet. That email contains every single piece of forensic data we just reviewed. It is addressed directly to the regional director of the Federal Financial Crimes Division. If I hit send, you will all be federally indicted by tomorrow morning. Your faces will be broadcast on every news station in Georgia. You will not just be broke, you will be convicts. The silence that follows is absolute. The wind howls outside, slamming against the reinforced glass windows, a brutal reminder of the freezing isolation waiting for them outside my doors. They are trapped. There are no clever legal maneuvers left. There are no backdoor country club handshakes that can save them. They are facing a woman who has systematically mapped out every single one of their weaknesses and eliminated all of their escape routes. Desmond looks at the pen resting on the stone table. He looks at his crying wife and his hysterical daughter. He looks at the white son-in-law who destroyed his life. Finally, Desmond looks at me, the daughter he threw away. He reaches out with a shaking hand and picks up the pen. Desmond presses the tip of the pen against the thick parchment paper. His hand is trembling so violently that the heavy gold barrel of the pen rattles against his wedding band. He drags the ink across the signature line, sealing his total surrender. The moment the pen lifts from the paper, the heavy silence in my great room shatters into a million jagged pieces. The psychological devastation is instantaneous and absolute. Chloe lets out a sound that does not even belong in a luxury mountain estate. It is a raw, guttural shriek of a woman watching her perfectly curated elite aesthetic dissolve into federal crimes and a secret mistress. She lunges forward, her expensive designer heels slipping on the polished stone floor. She slams her manicured hands into Preston's chest. She hits him again and again, her fists thudding against his tailored suit jacket. "You gave my diamonds to a Miami stripper." Chloe screams, her face contorted with a kind of ugly, desperate rage I have never seen her display. "You stole my inheritance. You ruined my life. I am a doctor. I am a sterling. You humiliated me in front of everyone." Preston does not try to calm her down. He does not pull her into a protective embrace or beg for her forgiveness. He has absolutely no use for Chloe anymore because the bank account attached to her last name is currently sitting at zero. The arrogant white corporate savior, my parents so happily elevated above their own black daughter, finally drops his mask of polite southern charm. He grabs Chloe by both of her wrists, twisting them sharply until she gasps in pain, and he shoves her backward. Chloe stumbles and crashes into the edge of a leather lounge chair, looking up at her husband in pure shock. "Grow up, Chloe." Preston snaps, his voice dripping with pure, unfiltered contempt. "You did not even notice $4 million missing because you were too busy swiping the corporate card for your ridiculous spa treatments and complaining about the catering at the country club. You were the easiest mark in Atlanta. I took the money because your father was too incompetent to realize it was gone, and you were too vain to care." Chloe bursts into loud, hysterical sobs, curling her knees to her chest, "Right there on my expensive rugs." My mother Valerie stares at her golden child writhing on the floor, but she does not move to comfort her. Valerie is too paralyzed by the rapid implosion of her own social standing. Preston ignores his sobbing wife entirely. He straightens his suit jacket, adjusts his cuffs, and turns his gaze directly to me. He looks at me, not with the condescending sneer he wore at the restaurant 6 months ago, but with the frantic, calculating eyes of a cornered rat looking for a drain pipe. He realizes that Desmond has no power. He realizes that Chloe has no money. He realizes that I am the only person in the room holding the keys to the jail cell. Preston takes a cautious step toward my side of the massive stone table, keeping a nervous eye on Jackson, my head of security. He raises his hands in a gesture of surrender, trying to appeal to me as a fellow executive. "Listen to me, Aisha," Preston says, his voice dropping into a rapid, urgent pitch. "You are a businesswoman. I am a businessman. We can make a deal. You do not need to forward that confession to the Federal Financial Crimes Division. You do not care about the $4 million. You just spent $25 million on this house in cash. You want your father punished for how he treated you. I can give you exactly what you want." Desmond snaps his head up from the table, his eyes wide with sudden terror. "Preston, what are you doing?" Desmond barks, his voice hoarse and broken. "I am saving myself, old man." Preston shoots back without even looking at him. Preston turns his desperate eyes back to me. "Aisha, I have the external hard drives. I kept encrypted copies of every single phantom shipping manifest your father generated over the last 5 years. I have the routing numbers for the illegal tax shelters he set up in Delaware to avoid paying corporate revenue taxes. I have the emails where he explicitly authorized the depreciation fraud. If you let me walk out of this house and give me 24 hours to leave the country, I will hand you the drives. I will give you everything you need to send Desmond to federal prison for a decade. I will testify against him in open court. Let me walk and I hand you the head of Sterling Logistics on a silver platter. The sheer absolute treachery of his offer hangs heavily in the air. The man my father brought into our home, the man my father trusted with the keys to his legacy, is eagerly offering to serve him up to the federal government to save his own skin. Desmond lets out a roar of primal betrayal. He lunges across the stone table, grabbing Preston by the lapels of his suit. "You miserable parasitic coward," Desmond spits, shaking Preston violently. "I gave you everything. I put you on the executive board. I treated you like a son." Jackson steps forward, effortlessly prying Desmond off of Preston and shoving my father back into his chair. Jackson stands between them, an immovable wall of muscle, ensuring the physical violence ends immediately. I look at Preston, feeling a deep, profound disgust for the man standing in front of me. I lean back in my chair, tapping my fingers against the cool stone surface. "You really think you have anything to offer me, Preston?" I ask, my voice echoing with icy precision. "You think I need your hidden hard drives to prove my father committed tax fraud? I am the software architect who built the very servers you stole from. I already have copies of the Phantom manifests. I already tracked the Delaware tax shelters. I have known about his financial corruption for years. The only difference is, I never sold him out, because I was stupid enough to believe in family loyalty. You, on the other hand, are willing to sell your wife and your father-in-law to the highest bidder the second your credit card gets declined." I nod toward Malcolm, my lead attorney. "Preston's confession is fully executed, Malcolm. Ensure the insurance fraud investigators receive the high-resolution photos of his mistress wearing Chloe's stolen diamonds immediately. Let him deal with the felony grand larceny charges on top of the corporate embezzlement." Preston goes completely rigid, his eyes wide with the realization that he has absolutely no leverage and no escape route. He is entirely ruined. Valerie watches. Preston collapse against the glass wall in defeat, and the final illusion of her elite, respectable life shatters. The country club dinners are gone. The luxury shopping sprees are gone. The bragging rights she held over her church friends are completely erased. She is looking at a future where her husband is facing federal indictment, her daughter is facing a humiliating public divorce, and her bank accounts are frozen solid. The realization breaks her. The proud, arrogant matriarch who demanded perfection and ruthlessly punished any deviation from her aesthetic drops right to her knees on the cold marble floor. Valerie crawls towards my side of the table. Her expensive designer coat drags through a puddle of melted snow. She reaches out with trembling, manicured hands and grabs the hem of my bespoke cashmere pants. She looks up at me, her face streaked with mascara, her eyes wide with a manic, desperate terror. "Aisha, please," Valerie sobs, her voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. "Please, you cannot do this to us. You cannot take the company. You cannot take our home. We are your parents. I carried you for 9 months. Chloe is your flesh and blood sister. We are blood, Aisha. We are blood. You cannot leave us with nothing. We will be out on the street. They will laugh at us. They will destroy us. Please, Aisha, you have to save us. You are the only one who can fix this." I look down at the woman gripping my clothes. I look at the mother who stood in an upscale Atlanta restaurant 6 months ago and smiled triumphantly while her golden child screamed at me to get out. I remember the decades of subtle hints, the constant comparisons to Chloe, the way she made me feel like an ugly, unwanted guest in my own childhood home. She did not care about blood when she sent me an eviction notice trying to throw me out of my apartment just to teach me a lesson. She only cares about blood now because she is bleeding out and I am the only one holding a bandage. I take a deliberate step backward, pulling my cashmere pants firmly out of her grasping hands. "Blood is just biology, Valerie." I state, my voice completely devoid of any warmth or sympathy. "Loyalty is earned. You threw me out because I did not fit your elite aesthetic. You watched me work 3 jobs to pay for my sister's medical school, and you called me a jealous failure. You just sat in a boardroom and actively plotted to frame me for a federal felony to save a white man who was stealing from you. You were perfectly willing to let me rot in a prison cell so you could keep your standing at the country club. Do not dare invoke the sanctity of family now. Now you do not fit into my reality." Valerie collapses onto her hands and knees, burying her face in the floor, weeping with the loud, unrestrained grief of a woman who has finally faced the mirror. Desmond sits heavily in his chair, looking at his crying wife, his sobbing golden child, and his treacherous son-in-law. The booming, powerful patriarch is completely gone, replaced by an old, tired, broken man. He realizes that begging will not work. He realizes that intimidation is impossible. He looks at me with hollow, defeated eyes, trying to salvage one final microscopic shred of dignity from the wreckage of his life. Aisha, Desmond says, his voice barely a whisper, rough and scratching against his throat. I understand. You won. You own Sterling Logistics. You own the debt. Just give me 30 days. Give me 30 days to clear out my executive office properly. Give me a month to speak to my employees, to secure their jobs, to transition the leadership without causing a panic in the industry. Let me step down with some grace. Let me handle the press release. I will walk away quietly. Just give me 30 days to pack my life into boxes. I stare at the man who gave me half of my DNA and absolutely none of his respect. He is still trying to manage his public image. He is still trying to control the narrative so he can tell his friends he retired, instead of admitting he was hostilely taken over by the daughter he discarded. I look at Malcolm and extend my hand. Malcolm opens his leather folio and pulls out two distinct, heavily stamped legal documents. He places them firmly into my hand. I step forward and drop the first document directly onto Desmond's lap. You do not have 30 days, I say, my voice slicing through the sound of Valerie's crying. You do not even have 30 minutes. Desmond looks down at the document. It is not corporate paperwork. It is a residential foreclosure notice. That is the formal eviction order for the Atlanta mansion. Desmond, I explain, watching his eyes widen in fresh horror. When I bought the toxic debt portfolio from the commercial bank, I also purchased the secondary liens you recklessly took out against your personal property to keep the business afloat. I own your house. My private security contractors are standing at your front gates in Georgia right now. The locks have already been changed. Your personal belongings will be boxed up and shipped to a storage unit of your choosing. You do not have a home to return to. I take the second document and drop it onto the floor right in front of Preston's expensive wet shoes. And that, I say, pointing to the paper, is a courtesy copy of the criminal complaint my legal team just forwarded to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It details your wire fraud, your corporate espionage, and the $4 million sitting in your offshore accounts. The federal authorities will be waiting for you when your plane lands. I turn my back on the four of them, walking over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows facing the snow-covered peaks. I do not need to look at them anymore. The transaction is complete. The debt is collected. Jackson, I call out, my voice echoing with finality. Escort them off my property, drive them down to their rental car. Make sure they do not take a single item from this estate. Jackson nods, stepping forward and clapping a heavy hand onto Desmond's shoulder, forcing the broken man to stand. The security team moves in seamlessly, grabbing Preston by the arm and hauling Valerie and Chloe up from the floor. The protests are weak and pathetic now. The fight has been completely drained out of them. They are just four shivering, ruined people being marched toward the heavy oak doors. Oh, and Preston, I call out over my shoulder, not bothering to turn around as they are shoved toward the icy exit. My security team is impounding the rental car you drove up my mountain. It was paid for using a corporate credit card that currently belongs to my company. You are going to have to call an Uber to get to the airport. I hear they are incredibly busy during snowstorms, so you better plan better. The heavy oak doors pull open, letting in a blast of freezing mountain wind, and then they slam shut with a thunderous resonant boom that shakes the floorboards. The click of the automated biometric locks sealing the estate is the most beautiful sound I have ever heard. The cavernous foyer is instantly restored to its pristine, absolute silence. The toxic noise, the weeping, the arrogance, the manipulation, it is all gone, completely scrubbed from my atmosphere. I stand alone in the center of my $25 million fortress, surrounded by the breathtaking beauty of the Colorado winter. Malcolm steps up beside me, holding two crystal glasses. He pours a measure of vintage red wine into each, handing one to me with a small, respectful smile. To hostile takeovers, Malcolm says, raising his glass. To earning my own loyalty, I reply, tapping my glass against his. I take a slow, deep sip of the wine, letting the complex flavors settle on my tongue. I turn and look out the massive glass windows, watching the heavy snow continue to fall over the pines. Down below, at the very bottom of my mile-long winding driveway, I can barely make out four tiny figures trudging through the freezing powder, shivering in their useless designer coats, locked out of the empire they thought they owned. They are completely erased from my reality. The scapegoat they created is dead. The Queen of the Mountain has officially arrived, and her reign is absolute. Desmond presses the tip of the pen against the thick parchment paper. His hand is trembling so violently that the heavy gold barrel of the pen rattles against his wedding band. He drags the ink across the signature line, sealing his total surrender. The moment the pen lifts from the paper, the heavy silence in my great room shatters into a million jagged pieces. The psychological devastation is instantaneous and absolute. Chloe lets out a sound that does not even belong in a luxury mountain estate. It is a raw, guttural shriek of a woman watching her perfectly curated elite aesthetic dissolve into federal crimes and a secret mistress. She lunges forward, her expensive designer heels slipping on the polished stone floor. She slams her manicured hands into Preston's chest. She hits him again and again, her fists thudding against his tailored suit jacket. "You gave my diamonds to a Miami stripper!" Chloe screams, her face contorted with a kind of ugly, desperate rage I have never seen her display. "You stole my inheritance. You ruined my life. I am a doctor. I am a sterling. You humiliated me in front of everyone." Preston does not try to calm her down. He does not pull her into a protective embrace or beg for her forgiveness. He has absolutely no use for Chloe anymore because the bank account attached to her last name is currently sitting at zero. The arrogant white corporate savior, my parents so happily elevated above their own black daughter, finally drops his mask of polite southern charm. He grabs Chloe by both of her wrists, twisting them sharply until she gasps in pain, and he shoves her backward. Chloe stumbles and crashes into the edge of a leather lounge chair, looking up at her husband in pure shock. "Grow up, Chloe Preston," snaps his voice, dripping with pure, unfiltered contempt. "You did not even notice $4 million missing because you were too busy swiping the corporate card for your ridiculous spa treatments and complaining about the catering at the country club. You were the easiest mark in Atlanta. I took the money because your father was too incompetent to realize it was gone, and you were too vain to care." Chloe bursts into loud, hysterical sobs, curling her knees to her chest, right there on my expensive rugs. My mother Valerie stares at her golden child writhing on the floor, but she does not move to comfort her. Valerie is too paralyzed by the rapid implosion of her own social standing. Preston ignores his sobbing wife entirely. He straightens his suit jacket, adjusts his cuffs, and turns his gaze directly to me. He looks at me, not with the condescending sneer he wore at the restaurant 6 months ago, but with the frantic, calculating eyes of a cornered rat looking for a drainpipe. He realizes that Desmond has no power. He realizes that Chloe has no money. He realizes that I am the only person in the room holding the keys to the jail cell. Preston takes a cautious step toward my side of the massive stone table, keeping a nervous eye on Jackson, my head of security. He raises his hands in a gesture of surrender, trying to appeal to me as a fellow executive. "Listen to me," Aisha Preston says, his voice dropping into a rapid, urgent pitch. "You are a businesswoman. I am a businessman. We can make a deal. You do not need to forward that confession to the Federal Financial Crimes Division. You do not care about the $4 million. You just spent $25 million on this house in cash. You want your father punished for how he treated you. I can give you exactly what you want." Desmond snaps his head up from the table, his eyes wide with sudden terror. "Preston, what are you doing?" Desmond barks, his voice hoarse and broken. "I am saving myself, old man." Preston shoots back without even looking at him. Preston turns his desperate eyes back to me. "Aisha, I have the external hard drives. I kept encrypted copies of every single phantom shipping manifest your father generated over the last 5 years. I have the routing numbers for the illegal tax shelters he set up in Delaware to avoid paying corporate revenue taxes. I have the emails where he explicitly authorized the depreciation fraud. If you let me walk out of this house and give me 24 hours to leave the country, I will hand you the drives." I will give you everything you need to send Desmond to federal prison for a decade. I will testify against him in open court. Let me walk, and I hand you the head of Sterling Logistics on a silver platter. The sheer absolute treachery of his offer hangs heavily in the air. The man my father brought into our home, the man my father trusted with the keys to his legacy, is eagerly offering to serve him up to the federal government to save his own skin. Desmond lets out a roar of primal betrayal. He lunges across the stone table, grabbing Preston by the lapels of his suit. "You miserable parasitic coward," Desmond spits, shaking Preston violently. "I gave you everything. I put you on the executive board. I treated you like a son." Jackson steps forward, effortlessly prying Desmond off of Preston and shoving my father back into his chair. Jackson stands between them, an immovable wall of muscle, ensuring the physical violence ends immediately. I look at Preston, feeling a deep, profound disgust for the man standing in front of me. I lean back in my chair, tapping my fingers against the cool stone surface. "You really think you have anything to offer me, Preston?" I ask, my voice echoing with icy precision. "You think I need your hidden hard drives to prove my father committed tax fraud? I am the software architect who built the very servers you stole from. I already have copies of the Phantom Manifests. I already tracked the Delaware tax shelters. I have known about his financial corruption for years. The only difference is, I never sold him out, because I was stupid enough to believe in family loyalty. You, on the other hand, are willing to sell your wife and your father-in-law to the highest bidder, the second your credit card gets declined." I nod toward Malcolm, my lead attorney. "Preston's confession is fully executed, Malcolm. Ensure the insurance fraud investigators receive the high-resolution photos of his mistress wearing Chloe's stolen diamonds immediately. Let him deal with the felony grand larceny charges on top of the corporate embezzlement." Preston goes completely rigid, his eyes wide with the realization that he has absolutely no leverage and no escape route. He is entirely ruined. Valerie watches Preston collapse against the glass wall in defeat, and the final illusion of her elite, respectable life shatters. The country club dinners are gone. The luxury shopping sprees are gone. The bragging rights she held over her church friends are completely erased. She is looking at a future where her husband is facing federal indictment, her daughter is facing a humiliating public divorce, and her bank accounts are frozen solid. The realization breaks her. The proud, arrogant matriarch who demanded perfection and ruthlessly punished any deviation from her aesthetic drops right to her knees on the cold marble floor. Valerie crawls towards my side of the table. Her expensive designer coat drags through a puddle of melted snow. She reaches out with trembling manicured hands and grabs the hem of my bespoke cashmere pants. She looks up at me, her face streaked with mascara, her eyes wide with a manic, desperate terror. "Aisha, please," Valerie sobs, her voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. "Please, you cannot do this to us. You cannot take the company. You cannot take our home. We are your parents. I carried you for 9 months. Chloe is your flesh and blood sister. We are blood, Aisha. We are blood. You cannot leave us with nothing. We will be out on the street. They will laugh at us. They will destroy us. Please, Aisha, you have to save us. You are the only one who can fix this." I look down at the woman gripping my clothes. I look at the mother who stood in an upscale Atlanta restaurant 6 months ago and smiled triumphantly, while her golden child screamed at me to get out. I remember the decades of subtle insults, the constant comparisons to Chloe, the way she made me feel like an ugly, unwanted guest in my own childhood home. She did not care about blood when she sent me an eviction notice trying to throw me out of my apartment just to teach me a lesson. She only cares about blood now because she is bleeding out, and I am the only one holding a bandage. I take a deliberate step backward, pulling my cashmere pants firmly out of her grasping hands. "Blood is just biology, Valerie." I state, my voice completely devoid of any warmth or sympathy. "Loyalty is earned. You threw me out because I did not fit your elite aesthetic. You watched me work 3 jobs to pay for my sister's medical school, and you called me a jealous failure. You just sat in a boardroom and actively plotted to frame me for a federal felony to save a white man who was stealing from you. You were perfectly willing to let me rot in a prison cell so you could keep your standing at the country club. Do not dare invoke the sanctity of family now. Now you do not fit into my reality." Valerie collapses onto her hands and knees, burying her face in the floor, weeping with the loud, unrestrained grief of a woman who has finally faced the mirror. Desmond sits heavily in his chair, looking at his crying wife, his sobbing golden child, and his treacherous son-in-law. The booming, powerful patriarch is completely gone, replaced by an old, tired, broken man. He realizes that begging will not work. He realizes that intimidation is impossible. He looks at me with hollow, defeated eyes, trying to salvage one final microscopic shred of dignity from the wreckage of his life. Aisha, Desmond says, his voice barely a whisper, rough and scratching against his throat. I understand. You won. You own Sterling Logistics. You own the debt. Just give me 30 days. Give me 30 days to clear out my executive office properly. Give me a month to speak to my employees, to secure their jobs, to transition the leadership without causing a panic in the industry. Let me step down with some grace. Let me handle the press release. I will walk away quietly. Just give me 30 days to pack my life into boxes. I stare at the man who gave me half of my DNA and absolutely none of his respect. He is still trying to manage his public image. He is still trying to control the narrative so he can tell his friends. He retired instead of admitting he was hostilely taken over by the daughter he discarded. I look at Malcolm and extend my hand. Malcolm opens his leather folio and pulls out two distinct, heavily stamped legal documents. He places them firmly into my hand. I step forward and drop the first document directly onto Desmond's lap. He flinches as if the thick manila envelope burns his skin. You do not have 30 days, I say, my voice slicing through the sound of Valerie's crying. You do not even have 30 minutes. What is this? Desmond asks, his voice a hollow rasp scraping against his throat. That is a residential foreclosure notice and an immediate writ of possession, I state. When I bought the toxic commercial debt portfolio from the bank, I also purchased the secondary residential liens you recklessly took out against your personal property to keep Sterling Logistics afloat. I own the Atlanta mansion, Desmond. I hold the deed. Valerie gasps, clutching her chest. You cannot take our home, she cries out. Where are we supposed to go? You do not have a home to return to, Valerie. I correct her coldly. My private security contractors are standing at your front gates in Georgia right now. The locks have already been changed. The security codes have been wiped. Your personal belongings, your designer clothes, your expensive china have all been boxed up by a professional moving crew and shipped to a climate-controlled storage unit on the outskirts of the city. The first month of storage is paid for. After that, you are on your own. Desmond looks like a man who has just been hollowed out from the inside. His shoulders slump, his chest caves in, and the commanding figure is entirely erased. He is just an old broke man sitting in a puddle of melted snow. I turn my attention to Preston. He is sweating profusely despite the freezing temperatures outside. I pick up a crisp white document, adorned with the official seal of the Department of Justice. I slide it across the table until it stops right in front of his shaking hands. And that, Preston, is a courtesy copy of the criminal complaint my legal team formally submitted to the Federal Financial Crimes Division exactly 1 hour ago, I say, watching the last remaining color drain from his face. It details your wire fraud, your corporate espionage, and the $4 million currently sitting in your offshore accounts. The federal authorities have been provided with the digital footprints, the IP addresses, and the high-resolution photographs of your Miami mistress wearing stolen diamonds. They are already waiting for you. Your passport has likely been flagged. You are going to federal prison. Preston staggers backward, clutching his chest, as if he cannot draw oxygen into his lungs. He looks at Chloe, begging for an ally, but Chloe just turns her face away, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. The golden couple, the pinnacle of the Sterling family success story, is completely destroyed. I stand up, pushing my chair back from the stone table. The movement forces all four of them to look up at me, cementing my absolute authority in the room. 6 months ago, you sat at a luxury dining table in Atlanta, and you told me to get out, I say, my voice echoing with terrifying power against the glass and marble walls. You laughed at me. You mocked my career. You threw me away because I did not fit your curated elite image. You told me I was dead weight. I walk slowly around the table, closing the distance between us. They shrink back, terrified of the woman they created. Now you are standing in my $25 million fortress, I continue. You tried to trap me into absorbing your debt. You tried to frame me for a federal felony to save a white man who was robbing you blind. You came to my mountain intending to destroy my life. Now you do not fit into my reality. I raise my hand and signal my security team. Jackson and 4 highly trained armed guards step forward, immediately boxing the family in. Escort them off my property, I command. The physical removal is swift and merciless. Jackson grabs Desmond by the arm, hauling him up from the chair. Desmond does not fight back. He simply hangs his head and lets himself be dragged toward the foyer like a defeated ghost. The other guards grab Valerie and Chloe. Valerie is screaming hysterically, begging me to reconsider, pleading for mercy, invoking the name of God and the sanctity of blood. Chloe is sobbing so hard her legs give out, forcing the guards to practically carry her across the polished floors. Preston tries to bargain one last time. He digs his heels into the marble, looking over his shoulder at me. "Aisha, please," he begs, his voice cracking with pure terror. "I can get the money back. I can sell the condo in Miami. Just call off the FBI. Please do not do this to me." A security guard shoves Preston forward, cutting off his pathetic pleading. They are marched through the cavernous foyer, moving toward the heavy oak double doors. The contrast between my pristine, heated sanctuary and their soaked, shivering desperation is a masterpiece of poetic justice. Jackson hits the biometric release and the massive doors swing open. A brutal blast of freezing mountain wind howls into the foyer, carrying a spray of blinding white snow. The storm outside has intensified, dropping the temperature to bone-chilling levels. The guards push them out onto the covered portico into the biting cold. "Oh, and Preston," I call out, my voice slicing clearly through the howling wind. Preston turns around, shivering violently, his thin designer coat offering zero protection against the Colorado blizzard. He looks at me with wide, terrified eyes, hoping for a last-minute reprieve. My security team is impounding the rental SUV. "You drove up my mountain," I announce, stepping into the threshold. "You rented that vehicle using a corporate credit card that is registered to Sterling Logistics. Since I now own Sterling Logistics, I am reclaiming my company property." Preston stares at me, his jaw dropping open in sheer horror. Valerie screams, clutching her arms around her chest. Chloe drops to her knees on the icy stone patio, weeping loudly. "You will have to call an Uber to get to the airport," I say, offering a sharp, merciless smile. "I hear they are incredibly busy during snowstorms, so you better plan better." I do not wait for their response. I step back and nod to Jackson. The heavy oak doors pull shut, slamming together with a thunderous, resonant boom that shakes the floorboards. The automated biometric locks engage with a heavy metallic click, sealing the estate completely. The acoustic shift is instantaneous. The chaotic noise, the hysterical weeping, the arrogant manipulation, the desperate begging, it is all gone. The howling wind is entirely shut out. The cavernous foyer is immediately restored to its pristine, absolute silence. The toxic poison that plagued my existence for 32 years has been completely scrubbed from my atmosphere. I stand alone in the center of my flawless fortress, surrounded by the breathtaking beauty of the winter's storm, raging safely on the other side of my reinforced glass. Malcolm steps up beside me, holding 2 crystal glasses. He pours a generous measure of vintage red wine into each, handing one to me with a small, deeply respectful smile. "To hostile takeovers," Malcolm says, raising his glass toward the window. "To earning my own loyalty," I reply, tapping my crystal rim against his. I take a slow, deep sip of the wine, letting the rich, complex flavors settle on my tongue. The taste is immaculate. I turn and walk slowly over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling, snow-covered landscape. The heated slate floors warm my bare feet, grounding me in the reality of my unshakable empire. Down below, at the very bottom of my steep, mile-long winding driveway, I can barely make out 4 tiny figures. They are trudging through the freezing, knee-deep powder, slipping and sliding on the treacherous ice. They are shivering in their useless designer coats, completely locked out of the kingdom they thought they could easily conquer. They are moving further and further away until they become nothing more than insignificant dark specks against the blinding white snow. They are completely erased from my reality. The scapegoat they spent decades torturing is dead. The queen of the mountain has officially arrived and her reign is absolute. The most profound lesson I extracted from the ashes of my family's betrayal is that blood is simply biology. True loyalty is an action that must be earned, never a right to be blindly entitled. For decades, I allowed myself to be cast as the perpetual scapegoat, shrinking my own ambitions and silencing my voice, just to maintain a fragile peace at a dinner table where I was never truly offered a seat. I bought into the toxic societal lie that because we shared a last name and a history, I owed them my endless forgiveness, my unpaid labor, and my quiet submission to their blatant disrespect. But the moment the heavy doors of my estate slammed shut entirely, cutting off their entitled demands and frantic empty apologies, I finally understood the magnitude of my own power. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that intentionally broke you, and you cannot force people to respect your boundaries when they are fundamentally committed to minimizing your worth. My family fully expected me to crumble when they threw me out, arrogantly assuming my survival depended entirely on their validation. Instead, their ultimate betrayal became the exact catalyst I needed to stop seeking their approval and start building my own unshakable empire from the ground up. I learned that walking away from a toxic family is not an act of cruelty or bitterness. It is the ultimate necessary act of self-preservation. Financial success is a brilliant silencer, but absolute inner peace is the true victory. I no longer measure my value by my mother's impossible standards, my father's conditional pride, or my sister's manufactured rivalry. I measure it by the unbreakable foundation I constructed with my own two hands when they left me with absolutely nothing. You do not ever have to set yourself on fire simply to keep your relatives warm. Share your own story of walking away from toxic